Good evening and welcome to the March 22 Menlo Park Planning Commission meeting. It is 7:02 p.m. and I am calling this meeting to order. We have present tonight Commissioner Barnes, Commissioner DeCardi, Vice Chair Doran, and myself, Henry Riggs, your chair. We have a couple of absences tonight. That would be Mr. Kale and Ms. Tate, and Ms. Kennedy is hoping to log in sometime in the near future, coming back from another meeting, an actual physical meeting out of town. So that constitutes a roll call. We also have present tonight from staff, Corinna Sandemeyer, our staff liaison, and Leo Tapia, I will call him our technical liaison because without him we would stumble through these meetings. And Mr. Parada, are you present also tonight? There he is.
Yes, Chair Riggs, I am here. Yes.
On screen. Very good. Next item would be reports and announcements, our item C on our agenda. And I'll ask staff if there are any items to report for this meeting tonight.
Yes, good evening, Chair Riggs and Commissioners. So tomorrow night, the City Council will review the complete streets plan. And that concludes my reports and announcements, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions this evening? All right, let's move ahead. We always, early in our meeting, have a public comment section. Although we take public comment on each of our projects that come before us during the meeting, this is a general public comment period during which the public may address the Commission on any subject not listed on the agenda, plus items that are listed under the consent calendar. For example, this evening, we have the minutes of February 8 and the minutes of February 22 Planning Commission meetings on the consent calendar. Each speaker may address the Commission once under public comment for a limit of 3 minutes. Please clearly state your name and address or political jurisdiction in which you live. The Commission cannot act on items not listed on the agenda, and therefore, the Commission cannot respond to non-agenda issues brought up under public comment other than to provide general information. So in order to make a public comment, if you look to the right of your screen, as you are virtually attending this meeting, you will see the Go to Webinar Control Panel. And on that is a hand icon. If you click on that icon, it tells our staff that you would like to speak, in this case on something that is not on the agenda. So this would be your opportunity to so indicate. Please do so, and we'll give you another half a minute or so. And in the meantime, Mr. Tapia, do you see any raised hands?
Good evening, Chair and members of the public. At this time, I am not seeing any virtual hands, but as usual, we can give it a minute or two, see if any come through.
Okay, we will do that. And again, as we go to our public hearing, we will have an opportunity to speak on those individual projects separately. All right, so if we don't have any raised hands, I'll just confirm that with Mr. Tapia.
I can confirm that, Chair. No virtual hands at this time.
All right, thank you. Then we will close the public comment period, move on to meeting minutes item E, which is our consent calendar. Tonight we have two items. That's approval of the minutes, Planning Commission meeting minutes for February 8 and February 22. Do I have a motion to approve, or is anything needed to be pulled for discussion, Mr. Ducardi?
I move to approve the consent calendar as submitted.
All right, thank you. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Vice Chair Doran, thank you. So we have a motion to approve and a motion to second. And I will just say, I personally have noted over several months that our staff-driven meeting minutes seem clear and accurate, reflected by the rather rarity of any corrections from those of us present. Much appreciated the quality, and once again we have a motion to approve the minutes as presented. So all in favor, let's raise our hands tonight. And that is unanimous, with Commissioners Barnes, Ducardi, Doran, and Riggs voting, and Commissioners Kale, Kennedy, and Tate absent this evening. All right, so we moved to item F, our public hearing. The first item is a use permit request, applicant Chelsea Bright, for 2040 Menlo Avenue. This is a request for a use permit to demolish an existing one-story single-family residence and accessory building and construct a new two-story single-family residence on a substandard lot with regard to minimum lot width and area in the R1U single-family urban residential zoning district. At this point, I'll ask staff if there are any comments or updates to be made on the staff reports before we begin discussion.
There are no updates to the staff report at this time. However, we are available to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Potts. All right. Do we have any initial questions on this project? All right, seeing none, I'll jump right on to public comment. If that's appropriate, does anyone want to see a presentation before we see public comment? Mr. Paz, staff, can you tell me whether Ms. Bright would like to make comments on this project at this time?
I do believe that Anna Felvar with Thomas James Homes is in attendance and may have a brief presentation.
All right, welcome, Anna. Would you like to say anything about the project before we go to comment?
Sure, just a little bit. Hi, commissioners and staff. Thank you for having us and representing Thomas James Homes on behalf of Chelsea Bright. Anna Felver again, so hello. Really quickly for 2040 Menlo, I just like to say thank you to Ori for working with us on this project. We're presenting a modern house on a substandard lot. It is quite narrow. It's a 50-foot wide lot. Trying to create more setbacks on the sides. We have a minimum of 5 feet and we're exceeding those on the sides up to 18 feet in some areas and 12 feet in others. So at least half the elevation on both sides are set back a little bit more than the typical minimum, and to achieve more privacy and to create more articulation on the sides and better massing. And then the front elevation, we're proposing a modern style home and creating some shed roofs and introducing a little bit of a parapet in the front, giving you that flat roof look is what's seen in modern styles, and trying to keep within that maximum height of 28 feet. I think we're at 25'11", so almost 26 feet, and staying within the daylight plane was a little bit of a challenge, but we got there and pulled our eaves in and made sure that we were creating different massings with the setbacks in the front as well, keeping a first story massing with the garage at the front and then stepping back to a higher second story. So we wanted to make sure that that massing was more towards the center of the home and then shedding down towards the sides. And let's see if there's anything else I wanted to bring up. We reached out to the neighbors and didn't receive any comments. So there's not really much to discuss there unless anyone has comments tonight and they'd like to ask questions.
Well, could I ask, was that outreach a matter of knocking on doors or email or dropping off plans at doorsteps? Just a brief comment about how you took that on.
Yeah, we are typically putting out mailings of the elevations and the plans and in a 300-foot radius. And then we typically, before demo or any construction starts, we knock on doors and make sure that they have a TJH representative and flyers about when those dates would occur.
So that's in the next step, you would do that.
Correct. And
All
seeing
right.
if they have any questions and desires for what's going on.
And the dominant materials on the project are smooth stucco?
Correct, smooth stucco finish. And then we have a horizontal siding on a feature wall that's in the front there on the left-hand side of the garage to break up, provide texture and break up that elevation a little bit more.
All right, that wing wall. All right, thank you.
Mhm.
All right, at this time, are there any questions regarding the presentation by the applicant? All right, let's go to public comment and see if there is any. Again, or if you're just joining us, if you would like to comment on this project, look to the right of your screen to the GoToWebinar control panel. You will see a hand icon. If you click on that hand icon, that will tell staff that you would like to speak regarding this project. We have a limit of 3 minutes for each speaker. As soon as you click on that icon, we are signaled that you would like to speak. It will prompt you for your name and we will announce you to speak. So please take a moment and do that if you would like to comment on the project. So Mr. Tapia.
Good evening, Chair, Commissioners, and members of the public. At this time, I am not seeing any comments for this project, but as usual, we can give it a minute or two to see if any come through.
Okay. "24 Minalto is between O'Keefe Street and Walnut Street in the Willows, for those who are wondering if it's close to your neighborhood, in your neighborhood. All right, so Mr. Tapia, no hands raised?
I can confirm there are no hands raised, Chair Riggs.
Thank you. Then we will close public comment and bring it to the commission virtual dais for comments on the project. Any questions, either of staff or of the applicant? All right, not Mr. Barnes.
I'll make a general comment about the building. I think whether it was the daylight planes or whether it was the vision of the architect or the homeowner, should there be one if it's on a spec building, I think they did a nice job in fitting this project in. And I think, importantly, from the front, from the street, I think it shows very nicely. I think it fits well They did have a narrow lot to work with. I have a question for the applicant on the choice of roof materials on that small shed that comes off of, that's over the garage in the comp shingle on that. Of course, it's preference. It does look, I'm wondering if you had contemplated a different material there, because you've got such a good looking building and it is so current, and the comp shingle almost goes 80s on you in terms of not really being congruent with some of the modern architecture. Is my thinking on that? And just was curious as to your thoughts on that.
We've been typically using the comp shingle just to give a more sleek look, especially at those fascia boards and barge boards. Concrete tile would give a heavier thickness up there, and especially with the daylight plane pinching on the corners, we want to make sure that we're keeping that line as minimal as possible.
And the choice of material being comp shingle, you're comfortable with, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, that's my comment. Thank you.
Mr. DeCarty.
Chair Riggs, this is for staff, and I apologize. I do live in this neighborhood, and I had assumed that this was in my 1,000-foot conflict zone, which means it would allow me to participate. But I actually just double checked, and it ticks into the 500-foot zone. So this is actually for staff, which is, I believe, in fact, I know I'm to recuse myself, and I apologize for actually having been on camera through this portion of it and ask what to do now. And again, my apologies. I just did not assume it was going to be in the 500-foot.
So, Corinna, are you present?
Yes, and Commissioner DeCarty and everyone, I apologize that staff didn't catch this. So we'll have to continue it to the next meeting, because we won't have a quorum with 3 commissioners.
In that case, I'm very, very sorry, and especially to the folks from Thomas James. I really regret you having to spend extra time on this. So sorry about that.
So, Ms. Sandemeyer, I'd like to just query, well, perhaps this is specifically a question for Ms. Felver. At some point this evening, Commissioner Kennedy had hoped to join us. Her live meeting on the other side of the bay was due to be over somewhere around 6:30, and she had hoped to be back by 7, but we all know meetings can run long. Would you prefer to stay another half an hour or an hour and we see if we can create a quorum, or would you like to reschedule?
Tonight would be wonderful. I'm willing to wait and see if we can get a quorum tonight.
Right. Well, I appreciate your flexibility and apologize for our volunteer committee. It's not always possible, though we've been doing an awfully good job of maintaining a quorum across the last year. So I'm going to suggest that we put this project on hold and move on to item F2. Now, that is a somewhat lengthy discussion, item F2, and in concert with item G, because that is a larger project. No one can predict how long a larger project will take, but the previous 2 hearings have been relatively straightforward. And so I would think that this hearing would be also on this project, having seen it before. Ms. Felver, you would have the opportunity at any time to indicate to staff that you don't want to wait. Mr. Barnes has a question also.
I do. Clarification on the radius. I know there was some some adjustments to that. Commissioner DeCarty referenced a 500-foot radius. Is it 500 or is it 300 feet for the purposes of having to recuse yourself from a residential property like this?
Ms. Sandemeyer?
And I guess more importantly, if it's 300, does that make a difference for Mr. DeCarty? That's the follow-on question, obviously.
Yes, it does.
Okay, and I thought it was 3. Can someone clarify that?
So I believe it is 3. So Commissioner DeCarty, are you looking at the map? I don't have it up.
So I'm looking what the city attorney handed me when I became a commissioner, which was a sheet of paper that had an orange circle at 500 feet, which said I had to recuse, and then a yellow circle at 1,000 feet, which said I had to use my discretion about whether I believed, because I lived in proximity, that I could fairly opine on the development. So, but that's all I know. That's all I grabbed. So.
Yes, so you are correct. I apologize again for the confusion. So within the 500 feet, you'll need to recuse yourself. That's correct. And
I will point out that this 500-foot radius, it depends on how you measure it, because it ticks the very corner of this property, and the property immediately next door would be fine for me to be here. But I don't imagine anybody can get a tape measure right now, so we should just go with the map as it's drawn.
Yeah, and staff will make sure to confirm for future meetings. So we apologize.
All right, so confirmed then. Thank you. All right, so is Mr. Morcos here, given that this was possibly a little earlier than he had anticipated joining us?
Yes, Chair Riggs, I'm here.
Thank you. That's wonderful. In that case, we will move on to item F2. Again, F2 and G1 are related. F2 is our draft EIR public hearing, the environmental report. And as we often do on major projects, we are using the same hearing to conduct a study session. And I believe this will be the 3rd study session on this project. Someone will correct me, I know if I'm wrong. So let me read our agenda for this evening for 104 Constitution Drive, 110 Constitution Drive, and 115 Independence Drive. 3 lots which act together for the Menlo Portal project. Mr. Andrew Morcos is the applicant for Greystar. This is a public hearing to receive public comments on the draft EIR for approximately 335 multifamily dwelling units, inclusive of 15 additional bonus units for the incorporation of on-site below market rate units per the city's BMR housing program. That's chapter 16.96.040. And approximately 34,868 square feet of office and commercial uses, inclusive of 1,600 square feet of neighborhood serving commercial space, in this case, a childcare center. The proposed project would contain 2 buildings, a 7-story multifamily residential building and a 3-story commercial building with office use on the upper levels and the neighborhood serving commercial space on the ground level. Both buildings would include above-grade 2-story parking structures integrated into the building heights so noted. Both buildings would include above-grade 2-story, oh, sorry, I just said that. The project site is located in the RMUB, that's residential mixed use, bonus zoning district. The proposal includes a request for an increase in height, density, and floor area ratio under the bonus level development allowance in exchange for community amenities. The proposal also includes a use permit request for the storage and use of hazardous materials, in this case diesel fuel, for an emergency backup generator to be incorporated into the proposed project. The draft EIR was prepared to address potential physical environmental effects of the proposed project in the following areas: population and housing, transportation, air quality, greenhouse gas emissions, and noise, meaning operation, period, traffic, and stationary noise. The draft EIR identified less than significant effects in the following topic areas: population and housing, and greenhouse gas emissions. The draft EIR identified less than significant impacts with mitigation for the air quality, transportation, and noise, again, operational and stationary noise topic areas. The city is requesting comments on the content of this focused draft EIR. The project location does not contain a toxic site pursuant to section 6596.2 of the government code. The city previously prepared an initial study for the proposed project that determined the following topic areas would have no impact, less than significant impacts, or less than significant impacts with mitigation measures, including applicable mitigation measures from the Connect Menlo EIR, which is the overall EIR for this development neighborhood. Those categories are aesthetics, agriculture and forestry resources, biological resources, cultural resources, energy, geology and soils, hazards and hazardous materials, hydrology and water quality, land use and planning, mineral resources, noise, that's construction, period, groundboard vibration, and aircraft related noise, public services, recreation, utilities and service systems, tribal cultural resources, and wildfire. All these categories are mandated by the Environmental Quality Act of California, in case you wonder. Written comments on the draft EIR may also be submitted to the Community Development Department at 701 Laurel Street, Menlo Park, no later than 5 p.m. on April 14 of this year, 2021. So, let's start with the EIR as a presentation. Again, tonight we will see both the EIR and the study session. So when we talk about the EIR, this commission is confirming that the scope of the EIR is appropriate, or having commented previously on that scope. And we will review the suggested mitigations, no doubt. Subsequently, we will have a separate presentation regarding the study session in which we will look at the architectural review, the below market rate development, the bonus level proposal, and so forth. So let us start with the EIR, and I'll look to staff to see who will make the presentation on this subject. Ms. Bagat.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, Commissioners and members of the public. The project before you this evening is a redevelopment of 3 parcels located at 115 Independence Drive, 104 and 110 Constitution Drive, located in the Bayfront area. The project site is located south of Bayfront Expressway and to the east of Marsh Road. The project site consists of approximately 60,000 square foot worth of office and warehouse buildings that are proposed to be removed. The 2 parcels are proposed to be consolidated, and there is proposed a lot line adjustment between the newly created parcels to create 2 parcels, one to house 34,800 square foot office building, and the second parcel to house a 335 unit apartment building. Of the 34,800 office buildings, 1,600 square feet will be dedicated as community amenity space. The project currently is proposing to use that space as a child care center. Of the 335 apartment units, 48 units will be dedicated as below market rate units available to low income households. The apartment building contains a studio, junior one bedroom, 2 bedroom, and 3 bedroom units. For the community amenity space, there is also approximately 200 square feet of outdoor open space attached to the childcare center, which is part of the plaza that exists between the office building and the residential building. The staff is recommending the Planning Commission move through 2 items this evening. The first item is review the draft environmental impact report, conduct a public hearing to solicit comments on the document. For this, after my presentation, staff recommends that you hear from the applicant who would go over the project in detail. There would also be a presentation from the city's environmental consultant following the applicant's presentation that will review the environmental process and the finding of the draft environmental impact report. Following which, staff recommends that the commission would open the public hearing and solicit comments on the draft environmental impact report from the community. After that, they would be allowed to ask staff and the applicant questions on the draft environmental report, and then to close the public hearing by providing comments on the draft environmental report. The second portion of this item would be the study session. By beginning the study session, staff recommends that we are allowed to introduce the questions that we need answered this evening by the Planning Commission as we move through the study session items. We request that the Planning Commission open the public hearing and solicit the community's comments on the study session after they've had an opportunity to ask staff clarifying questions, and then conclude the item by providing us your comments. This concludes my presentation. I'm, of course, available to answer any questions that you might have on the EIR and also on the study session piece. And with that, I would like to invite Andrew Marcos from Greystar to provide an overview of the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bhagat. Mr. Marcos.
Good evening, Chair, Regs, and Planning Commissioners. My name is Andrew Marcos. I'm representing Greystar. Just give us a second while we get the presentation up. Awesome. Okay. Looks like we're ready. Excuse me, just one second. Let's go back to the previous page, please. Thank you. So I'm here to give you an update on Menlo Portal, which is our 3rd project in Menlo Park and our 2nd housing development following the adoption of Connect Menlo. Plan is to focus this presentation on how we've incorporated your and the community's comments since our initial presentation in 2019. Although this presentation is about Menlo Portal, I thought I'd start by giving you a brief reminder of Greystar in Menlo Park. Between our completed project along Menlo Park and our 3 projects and entitlements, we are working with the city to provide over 1,100 multifamily units. Over 140 of these will be affordable BMRs. For comparison, Menlo Park currently has 477 BMR rental units. So these projects alone would increase the number of BMR affordable units by over 28%. Menlo Uptown, our first project post Connect Menlo adoption, is 441 rental units and 42 for-sale townhomes, and has completed its draft EIR comment period and is expected to be presented to Planning Commission for approval in late April. Menlo Flats, our third project, it consists of 158 units and is expected to start its draft EIR comment period in April as well. Let's go on to the next slide. As mentioned, the focus for today is Menlo Portal. So the project consists of 335 rental multifamily units and almost 35,000 square feet of office, and is located at the corner of Constitution and Independence, just east of Marsh Road, between the Menlo Gateway projects. On the next slide, I want to focus on our comments and responses to Planning Commission and community topics that were raised since the last study session. One big one was around BMR affordability levels, and we heard this about our project Menlo Uptown as well. For Menlo Portal, we proposed 48 low-income units, but we understand a mix of affordability is preferred. In discussing with the city, it appears that an equivalent alternative incorporating a variety of income levels from very low, low, and moderate would comply with code, and we are agreeing to work with the city on pursuing an option that offers an equivalent alternative. Second is around our community amenity. And over the course of the last 2 years, we've heard a need for, one, affordable housing, and second, for improved education opportunities in Belhaven. We've heard from this commission itself that childcare was very important. And so we found a way to incorporate 3,700, just under 3,800 square feet of indoor and outdoor space that will be for a community, will be a childcare early education center. And I'll go into more detail on that on the next slide. We've also worked on facade improvements, activating the publicly accessible Central Plaza with music and movies, and provided ample alternative transit opportunities, including electric bike charging in our bike rooms. That was an idea we heard here at Planning Commission as well. Lastly, we've continued to engage leaders on Dumbarton Rail and will advocate on behalf of the Bayside area and Belhaven to advance that project and ensure there's appropriate access from this area and Belhaven. On the next slide, I want to focus on our community amenity. As background, our total community amenity was determined by the city's appraiser and totals $8.6 million. The community amenity list, passed in Connect Menlo, identifies education improvements in Belhaven, and community members also identified education as a critical improvement needed in the Belhaven area. So we're recommending donating just under 3,800 square feet to All Five, which is an early education childcare provider that's existing in Belhaven, to operate a childcare center and to subsidize and to further subsidize with any additional funds available the All Five operations from the community amenity. All Five would run a preschool program for 20 to 24, 3 to 5-year-olds. And priority for enrollment will be given to Belhaven children, and priority for staff positions would also be given to Belhaven residents. Importantly, 75% of the students in this program either enrolled in the program either have free enrollment or heavily subsidized on a sliding scale. And the remaining 25% are at full cost. And the 25% that are at full cost ensure that the quality of care given to these to the kids here are equal or better than any other market rate childcare opportunities. So we're really excited about this opportunity and look forward to any comments the commission has on it. On the next slide, we have a little bit more information about where this childcare area is. You'll see on the left the 1,600 square feet, and on the right, we've allocated an additional space outdoors as required above the requirements for the childcare area. And this is along the Central Plaza, and so it's blocked from Marsh Road. On the next slide is just a quick overview of the draft EIR process. Comment period started on February 25th and ends on April 14th. Importantly, the draft EIR does not identify any significant and unavoidable impacts. And next up on the draft EIR is that it will incorporate comments received, and then we will return for a presentation to Planning Commission and City Council for project approval. With that, I want to introduce our team. Clark Manis from Heller Manis is our lead architect on the multifamily. Karen Kroleski from PGA is our landscape architect. And with that, I'll hand it over to Clark to go through more details on the design. Clark, are you able to? Looks like we might be having some issues with Clark. I'm
Clark?
sorry.
Sorry. Do you want to maneuver, Clark?
Yeah, your microphone is showing as active, Clark.
Okay, is it on now?
Yep.
Okay, it was muted before, so thank you very much. I apologize for the delay. Okay, we're all good to go. Thank you very much, Andrew. So good evening, Chair Riggs and fellow commissioners, and I want to thank you for your continued contributions on this project and the others that we have been before you. And the last time that we were before you in a significant way was actually January 2020. So certainly an enormous amount has changed in our world. So we've continued to refine the project details with staff, as you've heard in its new staff report. And so I wanted to provide you with a summary of the project design that's evolved over the last year. Your comments have been well received and I think have been reflected here. Next. Tim, next. Ah, wonderful, Griff. Okay, we're on a little delay here. So this rendering, which you saw a little earlier as part of Andrew's presentation, illustrates what we really feel is the exciting opportunity that this area that's evolved, and you've approved projects in this general area around it, Menlo Gateway, and now the Menlo Portal project, which is the combined multifamily and boutique office building. I think we're very excited about what this rendering illustrates in its potential for the activity and the scale that I think are embedded here. Next. So if you were to go across the street and look at the project in its context beyond the aerial bird's eye one, you look at one of the organizing principles that I think we have stayed with and I think you provided comments on is the Pocket Park. And the Pocket Park offers a very important organizing element that weaves the multifamily building on the left and the boutique office building on the right in a what we would describe as a much more informed composition. And so by intent, the community benefit that Andrew was talking to earlier, or the proposed child care center, which fronts the street in the Pocket Park, helps to reinforce the potential of the way this Pocket Park could work. Next. And looking backwards towards the street, within the Pocket Park, the multifamily building amenities on the right spill out into this space. Both you and staff have encouraged us to look at what those opportunities are. And up ahead on the left, which you really wouldn't be able to see in this rendering, but you saw earlier in Andrew's exhibits, show how we were able to take advantage of locating the child care center and an adjacent outdoor area as a part of it. This space also, by the way, provides a through block connection along 111 Independence and on the backside of the Menlo Portal multifamily project. Next. So as a brief refresher, the next three plans really illustrate things that we have shared with you in the past and we have reflected in minor issues on the compliance with staff. Is the ground floor. Next. A typical unit floor, lower level floor plan that basically allows us to conceal the parking from view from the streets, which I think was an important criteria. And the third is a cut through a typical residential floor in the multifamily office building and the single floor plate that's in the boutique office building to the left there, that's a part of that frontage. And in the next item is we just put it in here if we wanted to touch on it. This is a compliance analysis that we did that's reflected in the staff report about how we've dealt with both the public and the private open space. Karen will be able to elaborate in much more detail some of the issues that we have refined in the course of time associated with both the landscape and the open space. Next. So both this and the next image are really about talking about the materiality of the building, both the multifamily and the office building. And I think that the character that we really want expressed in both is a both crisp and warm character in the colors and the tones that could help unify the site expression together. So the multifamily in its character is a combination of fiber cement and stucco, aluminum, and black vinyl windows, yes, chair rigs, and allowing us to provide a sort of very defined vocabulary for the multifamily building. Next. And then the office building, which I would describe as a very boutique and very nice element as a part of this composition, is a dark brown anodized aluminum with the perforated metals that screen the parking from view. And so the combined vocabulary of the materials that we're proposing really for both buildings help to harmonize together. So with that overview, I want to turn this over to Karen, who can provide a great highlight on the landscape and the open space elements that we've developed in the course of time that we met with you in January of 2020.
Okay, thank you, Clark. So I'm just going to highlight some of the changes since we last presented. So at the street level, the biggest change is providing the space for the child development area. That's going to be on the east side of the office building, and it will be enclosed with an opaque fencing, and so it will separate from the central plaza. We've also created a drop-off zone for the child care facility on Constitution Drive. And then we've reconfigured the front entry ramp to the office building and also accommodating a separate entry to the child care facility. We've also added a drop-off zone on Independence Drive, and that's to function as a drop-off zone for the office building. The street level will also have a continuous green planting strip along the edges on Constitution and Independence, and will only break where there's a drop-off zone or parking for bikes, as there's not enough width to do both. So next slide. So this slide is showing the improvements at the Central Plaza. So there's not a lot of significant changes to the design, but there's been a lot of development since we last talked. Again, the Central Plaza is meant to function as a publicly accessible open space, a pocket park, as Clark mentioned, and it will include space for outdoor fitness classes, office workers on lunch break, places to walk dogs, perhaps an outdoor cafe area, and we'll also have space for occasional outdoor movie nights. The plaza features some stepped seating elements, which is the goal is to foster social gatherings. Those are shown in the image on the upper left and upper right, and those are spaced throughout the plaza. There's also reclaimed urban waste eucalyptus logs that will be placed along the pathway, and also will function as a different type of seating element. At the end of the plaza is a vertical log sculptural element, which will provide a backdrop to the plaza. We've also worked hard to integrate bike parking and have located that at both front entries to the portal building and have also spaced additional bike parking elsewhere on the site. The space also includes a dog walking area, which is kind of in the lower right, and it will feature decorative pavers and as well as a lush planting area with a robust tree canopy. The tree canopy will be fed off of the stormwater treatment center system that is below the pavers. So that's going to ensure that the tree canopy is actually robust and strong. And the planting that will be in the spine, we're going to feature multiple agave varieties integrated with blue fescue. And the next slide. So these are images of the level 3 and level 7 roof deck space, showing including the pool, spa, outdoor kitchens, petanque court, and other amenities as well. So that includes our presentation, and thank you for hearing our update for the Menlo Portal project.
All right, thank you. If there are no other elements to the presentation, perhaps this is where we move on to the EIR description.
Yes, good evening. I'm Teresa Wallace with LSA, the city's consultant for environmental review of the Menlo Portal project. Here we go. Tonight we also have Amanda Leahy from Kittleton with us. She is the transportation consultant representative. So please bear with me as I go through this presentation tonight. It's pretty similar to some of the presentations you've seen before for other projects in the area, so I'll get through it as quickly as I can. My slides are not advanced. There we go. So the purpose of this portion of the meeting tonight is to hear your comments on the adequacy of the draft EIR, which was published on February 25th. There we go. So the focus, again, is on the adequacy of the EIR, and the merits of the project will be considered separately. While we're happy to answer your questions or clarify material in the draft EIR tonight, we ask that any comments of a technical nature be provided again in writing, and then we will provide written responses. We want to be sure that we're providing the most accurate responses and may need to confer with our technical specialists. A court reporter is recording the comments, and a transcript of all comments received tonight will be prepared. Each comment on the EIR will then be formally responded to, and all comments must be received by April 14th. So this slide shows the overall schedule for the environmental review process. On January 7th, 2020, the city issued a notice of preparation, or NOP, notifying interested parties and responsible agencies that an EIR would be prepared, and an initial study was included for review. All public comments provided during the 30-day comment period were considered during preparation of the draft EIR. The city and LSA then prepared the draft EIR, and we're currently in the 45-day review period. After the close of the comment period on April 14th, we will then prepare written responses to each substantive comment received on the adequacy of the EIR analysis and what's referred to as the response to comments document. And then the response to comments document together with the draft EIR will constitute the final EIR. The final EIR will be published and available for review a minimum of 10 days before any hearings are held on the project. So this slide just gives some background on the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. the state law that requires environmental evaluation of the project. Generally, the purpose of CEQA is to inform the city's decision makers, other agencies, and the general public about potential environmental consequences of project approval. If environmental impacts are identified, then the lead agency needs to identify ways to mitigate or avoid those impacts. And when an EIR is required, alternatives to the project must also be identified and evaluated. The environmental analysis for this project tiers from the Connect Menlo final EIR. The Connect Menlo final EIR provided a program level of analysis of the development potential and vision for the entire city, including the increased development potential in the Bayfront area where the project site is located. This EIR evaluated the impacts of approximately 2.3 million square feet of non-residential space, 400 hotel rooms, and 4,500 residential units. The proposed project fits within the development assumptions of the Connect Menlo EIR, and so it's appropriate to tier from that document. A settlement agreement with the City of Palo Alto also requires certain projects that tier from Connect Menlo EIR, including those utilizing bonus level development, like the proposed project, to conduct a focused EIR with regard to housing and transportation. So environmental review of the project also complies with the terms of that settlement agreement. So as I mentioned before, an initial study was circulated with the notice of the EIR that an EIR would be prepared. And based on the conclusions of the initial study, the topics shown on this slide were not further evaluated because the project is not anticipated to result in significant environmental effects related to these issue topics. Or because the initial study found that these topic areas were adequately addressed through the program level of analysis in the Connect Menlo final EIR. The topics on the left of this slide are shown as potentially significant and were identified in the initial study for further analysis. So this slide just gives an overview of the findings for each topic evaluated in the draft EIR. Which I'll go over in the next few slides. The main takeaway, as was mentioned before, is that there are no significant and unavoidable impacts. All impacts can be reduced to a less than significant level with mitigation measures. So for the first topic, population and housing, a housing needs assessment, or an HNA, as we call it, was prepared in compliance with the terms of the settlement agreement to provide background and context for this section and analysis. So briefly, the project would fit within the growth projections identified in the Connect Menlo EIR and would not induce unplanned population growth. Additionally, the project would increase the availability of housing and would not increase displacement pressures on surrounding communities, including Bellhaven or East Palo Alto, and no mitigation measures were required. For the topic of transportation, a transportation impact analysis, or a TIA, was prepared consistent with the city's TIA guidelines. Under CEQA, as most of you are probably aware, roadway congestion or level of service is no longer the metric for evaluation of transportation impacts. In compliance with SB 743 and the city's updated TIA guidelines, vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, is the new threshold of significance. This threshold considers VMT per person or per capita, which is a measurement of the amount of distance that a resident, employee, or a visitor drives. So for mixed use projects like this one, each land use is independently evaluated, and the analysis for the residential component of the project determined that with implementation of the proposed transportation demand management plan, the project would be below the established threshold, which needs to be 15% below the regional average VMT. For the office use, additional TDM measures were recommended as mitigation to ensure that this use would also be below the threshold. The EIR also determined that the project would generally comply with applicable transportation-related plans and policies, would not create design hazards, or result in inadequate emergency access. Consistent with the city's TIA guidelines, a level of service analysis was also conducted for local planning and informational purposes in the EIR. 3 intersections were identified in the near term as exceeding the city's average critical movement delay threshold, and 5 were determined to exceed the threshold during cumulative conditions. Intersection improvements were recommended to be included as project conditions of approval. For the next topic, which is air quality, the analysis.
I'm sorry,
Yes.
may I interrupt and ask a question regarding the VMT threshold? Is
You
that
certainly can. It might be best if Amanda is called up to as a presenter. I know she's listening on the phone. Just wanted to note that.
all right? And if you would prefer that I wait and ask about this at the end of your presentation, I can do that.
Up to you.
All right. While we're on the topic, then, just to get a sense, the VMT threshold is something below 15% of the VMT expected for this region. Is that what I heard?
Right.
Right. And was that threshold set in consideration of the Connect to Menlo predicted development of this immediate region?
I'm gonna ask if Amanda can be called up to help answer that question, since she's the one that did the analysis.
Yeah, thanks, Teresa. Hi, everyone. This is Amanda Leakey with Gittleson and Associates. And to answer what I think you're asking is the established threshold, which is 15% below the regional or citywide average for the particular land use, is that a cumulative, is it a baseline or like the VMT that we see today, or is it anticipating the build out of Connect Menlo? So it's based on a future VMT, is that correct? Is that the question?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a baseline. So we're using the modeled baseline year of 2020 for that analysis.
I'm sorry, so I missed the connection. A baseline means not including Connect to Menlo, which was 2017 or 2016, or including the anticipated, is it current or anticipated is the key question.
It reflects current 2020 VMT.
All right, okay, thank you so much.
Sure.
Okay, thanks, Amanda. Okay, so just back to air quality. The analysis determined that implementation of the Bay Area Air Quality Management District's basic construction control measures would be required to reduce construction period impacts to a less than significant level, which is consistent with the findings of the Connect Menlo EIR. The project would also not exceed regional air quality emissions thresholds during operation. And the EIR also included a construction and operational health risk assessment, or HRA, consistent with the mitigation measures outlined in Connect Menlo. The HRA determines whether or not sensitive receptors, including existing residences, schools, or other similarly sensitive uses, could be exposed to toxic air contaminants, or TACs, as we call them. The analysis determined that mitigation measures would be required to ensure that construction equipment is equipped with specific emissions controls to reduce exposure of off-site receptors to TACs during construction. It's a fairly common mitigation measure. And the analysis determined that both on and off-site sensitive receptors would not be exposed to substantial increases in tax associated with the project during operation. For the topic of greenhouse gas emissions, all impacts would be less than significant, and implementation of the Air District's basic construction measures, which I just mentioned, would further reduce those emissions during construction. The project would be well below the Air District thresholds for operational emissions, and the project would generally comply with all applicable plans, policies, and regulations that have been adopted for the purpose of reducing GHG emissions. So finally, for noise, the analysis determined that transportation-related increases in noise would not exceed city standards. Because the project would locate residential uses in an area that is considered a conditionally acceptable noise environment by the city, mitigation measures would be required to reduce interior noise impacts. Again, that's a fairly common mitigation measure. And that includes installation of mechanical ventilation so that windows can remain closed, and use of noise reducing window materials. And that is, again, consistent with the findings of the Connect Menlo EIR. So this slide just gives an overview of the alternatives that were considered for the project. The alternatives are developed with the objective of avoiding or reducing potential impacts of the project. They were determined and identified in consultation with city staff, and based on the comments that were received during the NOP scoping period. Under CEQA, alternatives to a project must generally meet the basic project objectives. While a number of alternatives were considered, the EIR also included a full analysis of 3 alternatives, including the CEQA required no project alternative and 2 development alternatives. So the first development alternative is what we call the base level alternative, which looked at development of the site under the maximum base residential density allowed in the zoning district without community amenities and without bonus level development. So this would include about 224 fewer residential units than the project and a decrease of approximately 15,500 square feet of non-residential space, which would consist of retail rather than office use. While some of the impacts of the project would be slightly reduced due to the overall lessened square footage, none of the impacts would be entirely avoided, and similar mitigation measures would be required. For the maximum build-out alternative, this one looked at the development of the site under the maximum residential density allowed at the bonus level in the zoning district. And this would include 33 more residential units compared to the project and about the same square footage of non-residential space, but split between office and retail use. Similar to the project, this alternative would include the childcare space. And again, under this alternative, none of the impacts of the project would be reduced or avoided, and similar mitigation measures would be required. Ultimately, as is required by CEQA, the environmentally superior alternative was determined to be the base level alternative because impacts would just be incrementally less. However, this alternative would not fully achieve some of the basic project objectives related to maximizing the development potential of the project site, reducing the jobs to housing imbalance, and providing affordable housing. So with that, that concludes my overview of the CEQA process and the results of the EIR. Comments will be collected by the city and should be submitted, as should be shown on the slide I have next, but it's not popping up. Even if you make verbal comments at the hearing tonight, please again submit your comments in writing, and we'll be sure to respond to all comments as part of the response to comments document and the final EIR. So with that, I'll hand it back to the chair.
Sorry, thank you, Ms. Wallace. And so do we have any questions from our commission members regarding the EIR presentation? All right, well, I'll kick off. I do have one.
To the chair,
Yeah, Mr. Picardi.
I just had a question. Are we going to go to public comment and then ask questions, or are we doing questions and then public comment? What's the
I
order?
was going to do some initial questions, but thank you for reminding me. I think staff had suggested that we go to public comment first, which is a good idea. So at this time, if you are participating remotely, would you please look at the right side of your screen on the GoToWebinar control panel? You'll see a hand icon. If you click on that hand icon, this will tell staff that you would like to speak to the project. You will have 3 minutes to speak specifically on this Menlo Portal project. You'll be prompted for your name and we can identify you right away. So I'll start as usual asking Mr. Tapia if anyone has so indicated they would like to speak.
Good evening, Chair, Commissioners, and members of the public. I am showing a couple of virtual hands. I will go ahead and call upon the first virtual speaker. So with your permission, Chair, I would like to go ahead and introduce him.
Please.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Lynn Bramlett. As a reminder, if you can just please state your first name, your last name, and the political jurisdiction or organizational affiliation. So Lynn Bramlett, your microphone is now active.
Yes, good evening. I'm Lynn Bramlett, and I happen to be the lead for a grassroots-based disaster preparedness group. And as part of that, the government part is certainly part of that. And so I'm here before you as an individual, but I am more informed because of that broader interest in keeping the residents safe. And I want to point out first that when Connect Menlo was passed, that was a very quick process, and we also know a lot more today. And I'm learning about hazards, and the area where these projects are proposed is an area with substantial hazard risk due to the intersection of multiple hazards working together combined with sea level rise. So I like the developer, I like the project, but nonetheless, it's in a high hazard zone. First, they're located in a liquefaction zone area. And I had written you earlier an article and email with some links, and I'll try to summarize. Most damage from earthquakes, the Loma Prieta, the Christchurch, was because of that. So the ground becomes, depending on the shaking, the buildings are more prone to fall over. And what has made it worse is global sea level rise, because the groundwater is closer to the surface. And the groundwater doesn't just stay at low-lying areas. It's coming in deep into the land. And these are things that researchers, geologists, and yes, I have been at conferences by the U.S. Geological Survey, because I'm a thorough person. And there's actually even one meeting the next few days. So sea level rise is having an impact. And so I asked that as part of that, there is included a study of the stability of the foundation soils underneath the planned project. And at a later point, I asked that the Planning Commission start to look at the construction permitting process, in light of hazards. And then I also asked that Menlo Portal EIR include a mapping study of the groundwater table, what it is today, along with predictions from sea level rise. So I do want to say that, again, we continue to build in an area. When you take a look at that Cal OES My Hazard Zone, a big section is liquefaction, We now know more about how the rising groundwater tables, sea level rise, how these are working together to increase the probabilities of harm.
You have 10 seconds to wrap up.
Yeah. So I ask you to do more for this project and at the root cause of the bigger problem.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Tapia, we have a second speaker.
Yes, we do, Chair. I'm going to go ahead and introduce the next speaker. As a reminder to the speaker, if you can just go ahead and introduce your first name, last name, the political jurisdiction in which you live in, or your organization affiliation. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Kim Novello. Kim, you do have the ability to activate your microphone. Okay, now you should have the ability, Kim.
Sorry, I hit the wrong button. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you. So I have to admit I was quite a little overwhelmed by the size of the draft EIR, and I wasn't able to go through all of it, but I would like to comment on some things that jumped out at me. The first is in section 3.1.3, which is page 3-5. It mentions that it provides for higher density to meet the needs of all income levels. And I don't understand how income levels, what that has to do necessarily with density. I understand pricing of cost of living, but I feel like this is implying that certain income levels don't have the same needs as other humans that live in the building. And then also continuing in that same section, it goes on to talk about the project site, the purpose and intent of the zoning district identified. Number 3, it says, is to blend with and complement existing neighborhoods through site regulations and design standards. I don't believe that any of a 7-story high-rise blends with the, say, Bellhaven neighborhood at all. So that was an issue that I had. Also in, I believe it's section 4.0, page 4-1, it's talking about the definition of environment. And, pardon my kind of new introduction to all of this, but I'm not seeing, and again, I didn't read the whole entire thing, but I'm not seeing anything about the environment discussing like the effects on people, so mental health effects of changes in a 7-foot apartment building. And I believe that it should possibly be considered to be included in environment. Again, I don't know if you have control over that, but it's a big building, the 7-story one especially. And finally, regarding the office space, I was looking at the general plan as well, and if we want to fix the discrepancy between jobs and housing, I think all of our focus should be on housing and not necessarily office space. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Novello. And Mr. Tapia, do we have any other comments?
At this time, Chair, I'm not seeing any other comments.
All right, well, we've had 6 minutes opportunity to indicate, but I'll say one more time, if you would like to speak, your opportunity is now to click on that hand icon on the right side of your screen appended to your GoToWebinar control panel. All right, and seeing no light of recognition from my bottom right corner of the screen, it appears that we have heard our public comment for this evening. I will close the public comment period. and bring the discussion of the draft EIR back up to this panel. Questions for staff or the presenter? Or comments at this point, Mr. DeCarty?
Thank you, Chair Riggs. Thank you for the 2 public comments. Thank you to the team for the presentation of the building. It's going to be a great addition to the community, and for your time to engage with the staff to put this together. I have a question around where Chair Riggs had his initial question in the middle of the presentation on transportation. In the staff report and then in the presentation on the EIR is reference to the transportation demand management plan. And I'm not sure who to ask this of. I think it's of staff. But is the TDM plan that is being referred to in those comments the one that is in the EIR, which is on page 42-27? And is that the entirety of the plan, or is that TDM plan going to be further developed as the project moves along?
Well, this is Teresa with LSA. I'll jump in and say that the TDM plan that's presented in the EIR is the TDM plan that is proposed by the project. And I don't know if staff wants to speak to any further refinements that may occur throughout the process, but we've evaluated that TDM plan to be sure that it achieves the reductions that it's intended to in the EIR.
That's fine, that's helpful. Ben, can I ask you, how do you do that assessment? My read of the TDM plan as proposed is a set of opportunities to reduce vehicle miles traveled, but there is nothing in there that I see that is definitive. So you can go to a portal for more information. You have the opportunity to sign up for rideshare. There's a bike availability for you to park your bike. That all makes sense. But how do you know that it will actually meet the reduction that you said it's meeting in the presentation?
I'll ask Amanda to jump in there to talk about how she considers the TDM plan and her evaluation.
Yeah, thanks, absolutely. So it's a good question. The analysis relies on an extensive literature review and studies conducted it was completed by the California Air Pollution Control Officers Association, and it's applied, its use is widespread for this purpose to give an estimate of how much one might expect a project to be able to reduce its vehicle miles traveled when implementing those types of TDM measures. There are some citations in the table of the impact topic, the VMT analysis, that refers to the specific calculations that were completed for this project for that TDM plan.
Thank you for the clarification. I appreciate it. And then, is there any, and this may be a question of you, from that analysis, or it may be of the applicant, are there any measurement mechanisms? I mean, it is one thing to offer the opportunity for demand management reduction, but is there anything that ever happens in a TDM plan like this for this project that would actually have measurement and evaluation if in fact that goal had been met? And is that something you looked at in the EIR or not?
Staff can confirm, but that is a requirement of TDM plans, that they do be monitored and evaluated.
Yeah, this is Renee. I can't make my webcam working here, but I'm the Associate Transportation Engineer with Menlo Park. So we are going to require the applicant to submit an annual report to monitor the effectiveness of the TDM measure. So they can provide a survey or any metrics that will provide us information whether this TDM measure is meeting what the TDM plan is proposing. So like, for example, if they're offering the residents to some usage of, let's say, the Caltrain Pass, that information they need to report, the applicant needs to report to us. So at least we'll know whether they're effective or there are some changes that they need to make. So there's a mechanism for staff to know that the TDM plan measures proposed are effective or not.
And you're going to do that by a survey of who?
No, the applicant will do a survey of their employees or their residents, whether they are doing some of the TDM plan measure like biking or walking or doing some transit, and they'll provide this information to us where they can survey their employees or residents that they indeed are doing this or not. So those are the type of things that we could, the information that they can provide us to let us know that they're meeting the TDM plan goals.
All right, thank you for the clarification. I won't go any further onto this. I'll just note that this is a comment. My comment is that I think the TDM plan needs to be more specific than general, and I think the monitoring and assessment needs to be strong and stronger than surveys. And there are many, many ways that that's done in different projects in the Bay Area and in different places. This is not questioning the commitment of the developer. It's just human nature in this mix.
Yeah, I just mentioned surveys, one instrument, but there could be doing some driveway counts to make sure that, or to measure what the trips are or from driveway. So it's just one of the tools, but it's not going to be the main tool.
I just think it should be clear, and I think it should be made public so that people are aware and know.
Understood, Commissioner DeCardi.
Thank you very much. And then this is my last set of questions on the EIR, and it's also on transportation. And this is a question back to the presentation on the EIR about the alternatives considered but not selected for further analysis. So on 618, the two that are interesting to me are the reduced parking analysis, and then the no net VMT increase, no net GHG increase, but the no net VMT increase. And I'd like to understand a little bit more about why those weren't looked at. First of all, thank you for at least putting them in there. That was my interest in all of these projects. So thank you for at least acknowledging it. But then to understand more about why that was not done. And specifically, it looks to me that the reason it's not done is that there is an assumption that it is not in the capacity of a single project in a community like ours to be able to make such a reduction, that to get to no net VMT, or that there absolutely would be leakage, that if you didn't have parking, that by necessity, the parking then would leak into the rest of the community and cause problems. And I want to understand the logic behind both of those assumptions.
Well, maybe Amanda can bail me out again since she helped with these, but basically the project site is in a really high VMT area. And so to achieve no net new VMT, you would basically have to replace the existing buildings on the site with a building of a similar size and a similar use. Otherwise, almost any type of project in this area will result in some kind of new VMT that requires reductions in a TDM plan. So I don't know if that's kind of getting to your question. I mean, the point of the alternatives analysis is to find a way to reduce impacts. And we looked at that possibility, and just such a project probably wouldn't be viable, wouldn't meet most of the basic project objectives, and wouldn't really achieve any effective reduction in VMT. And as far as no parking, there was some discussion and evaluation of that potential impact. And again, it was determined that a project that didn't provide any parking would sort of result in new impacts in this area, which is not very well served by transit. And that having a project in this area right now that didn't provide any parking would also probably not be very viable and might cause actually additional environmental impacts, as you then have folks driving around looking for parking, creating more congestion, and resulting emissions. So I don't know if that kind of gets to your question.
Sure, that's helpful. Again, I'll make my comment now just on the heels of this, which is the purpose of an EIR is sunshine. The purpose of an EIR is so that members of the community can have information in order to be able to then voice their opinion about the viability of a project and the benefit to the community. And I appreciate your response. I think it makes sense, but it is also based on a fair number of assumptions. And if we just go back to the earlier question about the Transportation Demand Management Plan, there's a whole set of literature review of practices in other communities, of ways to be able to assess what a no parking alternative truly would do. And that to me seems like our city should put this into an EIR in a part of our community that is already completely maxed out and stressed out by the influx of vehicles. So this is more just a comment to our city and to when we have these EIRs. I don't understand why we, in a city where, in a community like that, we have a massive transportation problem, we know we have a massive transportation problem, and we won't even look at an EIR for a sunshine measure at a no parking alternative or a no VMT alternative, or something that gets close to it, so that at least we could have the information available to us to be able to then ask the developer if there are some things that they would be able to do. I just think not looking at it more in depth is a big mistake, and I think it's a problem. I think there's absolutely more than we can do as a 15% reduction. I think you can absolutely run no parking projects, and you can monitor those by license plates, by staffers who are coming to a boutique office building. And I think there are all sorts of ways that you then put the incentive into developers in the community to solve the problem. But what we're doing right now is we're essentially saying, well, it's a community-wide problem, but we'll only look at it project specific. And then we look at a project specific and we say, well, we can't do anything about it because it's a community-wide problem. And this is just not tenable. So this is not a complaint necessarily about this project. It's a frustration with EIRs and how we're doing them. And we're not doing a service to our community to get the right kind of information to be able to look at this problem long term. Thank you, Chair Riggs. Those are my comments on the EIR this evening.
All right, and thank you, Mr. Ducardi, for targeting a particularly sensitive point. I seem to recall, and I may be in error, that at our last meeting, and there are multiple projects, so this could be a problem if it were another Greystar project, that we made the comment, but we did ask for an alternative that was all housing. And I don't see such an alternative listed here in the draft EIR. I do see one that is essentially the same program, but with the housing shifted to all affordable. That's a slightly different target, and it's a very different effect. So I would have preferred an alternative that was strictly housing for the purposes of our evaluation. So I'll continue to ask for that. Before I, actually that may be my only EIR question or comment. So anyone else on the commission have an EIR comment or question? Mr. Barnes.
Thank you. I do have an EIR question and also have a clarifying question to the chair. Is right now only for EIR, and then we have a separate break off for specific project related questions, or are they commingled in this particular time, project and EIR? How's this working?
Yes, the former. We'll have a sort of a renewal presentation from staff or Mr. Manis and then we'll launch into architectural review, BMR, and other related study session issues. But that will be very soon after the next public comment.
Thank you. So my question to whomever, assume it's our EIR consultant, it relates to in the EIR itself, the report itself on page 4.2-29. And these were the ones that we were sent. And I'll give you a moment to pull that up. In specific, looking at the table on that page, table 4.2.B, vehicle trip generation estimate.
The benefits of remote, I can pull anything up. I have it up. Again, I might need Amanda to assist me, but go for it with your question.
Thank you, Teresa. Okay, so this is kind of a math question, and tell me how I should think about this. So we've got this project, and the balance of square footage is approximately 90-10. You've got 90% residential, 10% office in this case. Now, so I've got that ratio, that 90-10 ratio residential office. Now I come to this table 4.2.B, and it's about vehicle trip generation estimates. And what I'm trying to tease backwards is the trip generation impacts of residential versus office. So for instance, the quick math that I did was, if I add all the daily trips from residential, and I add the daily trips from office together, and I'll just run through it. You don't have to follow my math in your head, just give you an idea of my methodology here. So we've got our daily trips generated from office, or from the commercial component, the office component, as it's called, and from residential. And that ratio is roughly 85-15. So just doing some high-level math with a 90-10 ratio of residential to office, and then with a trip ratio of 85-15, I'll call this roughly equivalent. Shifting, if for instance, the project were to have less office and more residential, it would still result in a shift of car trips to the residential side in relative proportion to the shift. Say it went from 90-10 or 100 residential to 100 to 0% office. You would have a corresponding shift. You wouldn't get rid of car trips. You would simply shift residential car trips. You would simply shift office car trips to residential car trips in roughly the same proportion as the constitution of the building. That's kind of what I think I see here, and I'd love to be disabused of that notion, or otherwise told how it works. But we talk about going with residential and in the same idea, thinking about reduction of car trips.
Amanda, do you have some thoughts on that?
I think I'm not following you. I don't know if there's a way you can state that differently, perhaps.
Sure, I guess, so with that, I was trying to contextualize the question. So maybe a simpler way of saying is, what's the ratio for determining if this were to be all residential instead of 90-10 office residential, what would happen to the total trip count? And is there a quick back of the napkin ratio that you use that would allow any, my layman's trying to figure out what that might be. So how would the trips, so I'll just say it that way.
Well, I don't know if there's a quick back of the envelope calculation, but I think all of the documentation for the trip generation is included in the appendix, and that should include the trip generation rates that are used to calculate the daily and the AM and the PM peak hour. If you're looking at the daily alone, I mean, I think, you know, the approach you're taking could give you a general look at, you know, idea of what that might look like. It gets a little bit more complicated when you're thinking about the AM and the PM and the inbound and outbound split. So I'm not entirely sure the objective here, particularly since like the vehicle trip generation estimates themselves aren't like they are related more to the level of service analysis that was provided for the local transportation impact assessment. So I don't know if I'm really answering your question here, but I guess I'd just say if you're looking for the trip generation rates, they are provided in the appendix.
Would going 100 without, I assume you got to rerun the model. So the hypothetical I'm asking is, say you went say you went from 90-10 to 100% residential. Would the amount of trips decline, increase, or otherwise stay static? And it sounds like what you're saying is there's multiple factors in that, so you'd have to rerun the numbers specific to that. Is that, and you couldn't postulate on that question, correct?
I think the easiest thing is just to say correct, you know, because it's also a difference in looking at residential units versus residential square footage and office space square footage.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to jump in here for a second on this on this topic, because it seems to me that for this project, which focuses on small units, the daily trip count per square foot is quite similar between office use and residential for this project and this kind of unit count. Is that a stretch of a conclusion, or is that in the ballpark? Amanda, I guess this is thrown to you.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I don't have the Excel sheet in front of me, so I'm going to say we can get back to you with that.
All right, I think that would be a potentially useful reference to have for a meeting like this. And obviously, in this case, that would be useful. So thank you.
Let me just add, I don't know how you, I mean, if you just run the numbers, I don't know how you can find any different from that. I mean, you can parse it. Yes, a dwelling unit's different from the square footage of commercial, clearly, but you can do a correlation for each square foot allotted to a particular use, car trips. Now it's gonna, so I think there's a number there. I think there's some type of relationship that's fairly, that would toggle with the proportions of office and commercial, but I'm sorry, I spoke out of turn.
No, you didn't. It was your question. And I will just emphasize it's my conclusion or my reading that if you have average unit size of around 600 square feet and you have what, 326,000 square feet, you have an idea of how many units you have, and therefore, since it's unit count that is somewhat emphasized for daily trip count, because you're as likely to have 2 cars in a 1-bedroom as you are in a 3-bedroom, depending on the market, blah, 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 for daily trips. One can only look at, I think, a given program, because if the predominant units were 1,300 square feet, you know, say typical to Suburban Park, then the 326,000 square feet would result in a prediction of fewer car trips, I believe. And I think that's why Amanda hesitates. But in the case of this, I have to agree with Commissioner Barnes that one can resolve a number, and the numbers seem to be quite similar. So, which in a sense predicts what would have been a conclusion had I seen the alternative project EIR study for an all residential project. I think there's a suggestion there that the daily trip count would be similar. Or I'm sorry. Well, yes, because daily trips is what we're looking at. That doesn't necessarily clarify TDM though. So I do hope, I'm sorry, VMT. So I do hope in the future that we get an alternative, if not on this project, on another one that is all housing as opposed to mixed use. I think it would be valuable. Anyone else have a question on the EIR or comment? I know they are a lot of work, and I appreciate that this is presented to us and in a readable format. So with that, Ms. Payal, are we, I'm sorry, Payal, Ms. Bhagat, are we ready for the study session introduction?
Yes, we are, but I believe, and Kyle or Karina can correct me, we have to close the public hearing for this one, which we already did, yes?
We did a public comment on the EIR. Yes, we did, and we had 2 commenters.
Okay, so yes, then we can proceed with the study session. And I have a brief presentation.
So would you like to read this or shall I?
I think you have to read it in the record, please.
My pleasure. All right, so we move on to our item G. It is, in this case, G1 study session for the same project that we have just discussed in terms of the EIR. This study session is for a use permit, architectural control, lot line adjustment, lot merger, below market rate housing agreement, heritage tree removal permits, and environmental review. Applicant Andrew Marcos for Greystar. Current lot addresses 104 Constitution, 110 Constitution, and 115 Independence Drive, known as the Menlo Portal project. So this is a request for a study session for those items to redevelop 3 parcels with approximately 335 multifamily dwelling units, inclusive of 15 additional bonus units for the incorporation of on-site below market rate units per the city's BMR housing program. Approximately 34,868 square feet of office and commercial uses, inclusive of 1,600 square feet of neighborhood serving commercial space. The proposed project would contain 2 buildings, again, a 7-story multifamily residential building and a 3-story commercial building with office use on the upper levels and the neighborhood serving commercial space on part of the ground level. Both buildings would include above grade 2-story parking garages integrated into the buildings. The project site is located in the RMUB, Residential Mixed Use Bonus Zoning District. The project site currently contains 3 single-story office buildings that would be demolished. The proposed residential building would contain approximately 326,581 square feet of gross floor area, with a floor area ratio of 235%. That is 235% compared with the lot area. The proposed commercial building would contain approximately 34,868 square feet of gross floor area, with a floor area ratio of 25% of the lot area. The proposal includes a request for an increase in height, density, and floor area ratio under the bonus level development allowance in exchange for community amenities per Menlo Park Code. The proposed project would include a below market rate housing agreement that requires a minimum of 15% of the units. That's 48 units of the 320 maximum units allowed by the zoning ordinance before accounting for the 15 bonus units, that the 15% be affordable. The applicant is proposing to incorporate 15 additional market rate units, which are included in the grand total of 335 units per the density bonus provisions in the BMR housing program, another Menlo Park code, which allows density and FAR bonuses and exceptions to the city's zoning ordinance requirements when BMR units are incorporated into the project. The proposal also includes a use permit request for the storage and use of hazardous materials, diesel fuel in this case, for emergency backup generator to be incorporated into the proposed project. So back to Ms. Baguette. Would this be Mr. Manis to make additional comment?
So staff has a really brief presentation before we can just transition to questions, and then open up the public hearing again to solicit comments from the community on the project, the design, and BMR proposal, community amenities, etc.
All right, so staff is suggesting some commission questions before we do another public comment period.
Correct. So thank you again. And just want to briefly touch on the set of questions that we have that we would like input from the Planning Commission, and you can refer to these questions on page number 34 and 35 of the staff report. But basically, staff is asking the Commission to provide input on the overall project design, particularly the layout of the open space and how it interacts with the neighboring project that is being proposed at 111 Independence Drive. We also ask you to comment on the appropriateness of the design as it fits within the front area. Staff is requesting that you please provide your input on the community amenities proposal, and does the Commission think that the childcare amenity that's being proposed is appropriate and fits within the Council's adopted list of amenities. If we conclude that, or you conclude that it does, then we would like comments on how appropriate is the size and location of the amenity, and how can the applicant bridge the gap between the evaluation that was done of the community amenity and the total amount that they need to provide as part of the amenities proposal. We would also like your comments on the appropriateness on the request of parking and bicycle parking waivers. The BMR proposal, which is currently, as I mentioned, available at low income only, and it's not a mix, and we would like to hear your comments on that. And finally, we would like to hear your comments on the appropriateness of including intersection level improvements based on the TIA or TIA guidelines, which is based on level of service, as part of the project conditions of approval that will bring the traffic associated with this project to pre-project conditions. And with that, I would I'm here to answer any questions that you might have. The applicant is available too, and we'll turn it back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Paquette. Any initial questions from the panel? Mr. Barnes.
So first question, when you say initial questions, we'll come back to answer what was put up on screen. What you're looking for now is clarifying questions, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So I have a question about the childcare square footage. I saw it referenced, I believe at 1,600 square feet, and then in the presentation, I think I saw it at 33,000 and change. Could we get clarity on what the square footage is and what's in it? Is it all interior space? Is it 1,600, 3,000? The exterior space is separate from that. Just some parsing out of that would be helpful.
Mr. Marcos, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Commissioner Barnes. So the interior space of the childcare is 1,600 square feet, and the remainder of the total 3,790 is the outdoor space. So 3,790 minus 1,600, there's 2,190 square feet of outdoor space.
Thank you. Other questions, Mr. Barnes?
Yes. And this is a question, it might have been touched on a moment ago. Mr. Marcos indicated that the value of the community amenity, I think, was $8.44 million, and is what we're thinking about is whether this community, whether, for instance, the child care equates to that. Is there a gap in there? What do we do with the delta? What do we, the community amenity number, and do we have a number that this child care is intended to represent, and is our job to bridge the gap there? Or think about that.
Yes. So there's a portion of it's 8.55 million that is dedicated to the actual real estate. And the remainder is what we would go to help all five, the operator here, continue to subsidize kids with priority for Belhaven. And the split is, we're still working with the city on the exact split of how much the real estate accounts for versus the additional funds that would be available. But it's around 2 to 3 million is the real estate, and then the remainder would be funds that go to support all five through kind of build out of the space, furniture, fixtures, equipment, outdoor equipment, and then further to subsidize the cost of free admission for Belhaven residents or reduced cost admission for Belhaven residents.
And thank you through the chair. So the former part of that, the reference to the real estate part of it, is that in essence the value of the abatement of the rent over a defined period of time? Is that what's considered the real estate component of it?
Yeah, and the reason we're going back and forth is because BAE only valued the interior, but in the market, the exterior or outdoor space dedicated to an interior use is designated some value as well. And the way it's measured by BAE is foregone rents over a 50-year period.
Okay, so we can, this is a question, this is a confirmation to the chair. We can chunk this out when we get there, correct? we can walk through some of the mechanics of the questions we have to ask. I want to make sure I'm focused just on the clarifying questions, and then any granular detail, we'll just work on that when we get to the particular questions.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, good. That is my question. Thank you.
All right, any other questions at this time before we go to public comment? All right, let's move again, same project, but in this case, the public comment is on the subject of a rather long list of items for discussion, including the architectural design, the below market rate ratio, the combining of lots in order to create the project, and so forth, the nuts and bolts of the project itself. So if you would like to speak, please look to the right of your screen at the GoToWebinar control panel, where you will find the hand icon. You click on the icon, and that will tell staff that you would like to speak. You will be prompted for your name. And this would be the time to speak on the architectural and approval bones of the project. So, Mr. Tapia, do we have our usual suspect or other commenters raised hands?
Good evening, Chair and members of the public. At this time, I'm not seeing any comments, but as usual, we can give it a minute or two to see if any come through.
Yes, let's. And again, this is on the predominantly the design and program elements of the project itself. We will comment on.
Okay, Chair. If I may, it looks like we did receive a virtual hand, and with your permission, we'll go ahead and introduce the speaker.
Please.
Okay, so just as a reminder, if you can please state your first name, last name, your political jurisdiction in which you live in, or your organizational affiliation when you are activated. So at this time, I will introduce Kim Novello. You should have the ability to activate your microphone now.
And you have 3 minutes, Ms. Novello.
Kim, as a reminder, you do have the ability to activate. Okay, there you go.
I apologize, I keep hitting the wrong button. So thank you again. As you're aware, I did obviously comment on the EIR draft. So I just want to make sure I'm commenting at the right time. And I don't know if this is appropriate or not, but yeah, I think having more housing versus office space would be my recommendation, as well as the potential, I don't know if it's an option, but I once visited an apartment building in Seattle where the grocery store was at the base of it, and it was fabulous for the residents who could just take the elevator down to get to the grocery store. So that I don't know if that's something that could be a possibility. And as far as childcare space, as well as the open play space for kids, it looked a little tight, and I don't know with the space given if you can improve on that, but just making sure that, especially for a building with 7 stories of potential families, that there's adequate room for the kids to run around. And I'm talking like kids that parents may want just to go outside and play. And, so maybe in the I don't know, 4 or 5 to 8-year-old range, they need a place room to run and play. I did notice some TVs next to the area and other amenities, and it seemed a little squished for what various needs for various types of residents may be. So that's all. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Novello. And I will just point to the program for this particular building, which is predominantly studios and junior one bedrooms. Mr. Tapia, do we have any other would-be speakers?
At this time, Chair Riggs, I'm not seeing any other public commenters.
All right, so let's just give this a few more seconds since it's just been 2 or 3 minutes since our announcement. All right, lacking another signal, I think we'll close public comment and bring it back to the commission, starting with Mr. DeCardi.
Yeah, I actually have a clarifying question, and it's around the line of questioning that Commissioner Barnes was beginning. I'll ask my clarifying question and defer to Commissioner Barnes. He can pick up the thread since he had started. This is of staff, and it's the community amenities list, which is attachment H, I believe. And I've seen this multiple times now, and now I really I need to understand what this is. So we've got a Xerox copy of something from a 3-hole punch binder that has a list that came from community input back when Connect Menlo was happening. How are we to understand how many people total provided that input? It's also unclear, even though the attachment says that it's to be ranked, like it looks like this was used for some kind of dot exercise in a community engagement. But are the A, B, C, D, and E actually the final rankings of the importance to community, or does that just happen to be the list? In which case, how are we supposed to interpret the importance to the community about how many people provided that? So what is that document, number one? And then number two, it would sure be helpful if the staff could let us know which of those community amenities essentially have been covered, because so much has changed since then, and several of the items have been completely included in separate projects, so would not necessarily be on the list. Because you asked us for our input into alternatives, and we're going to get to this around a child care facility or a child care facility plus or a separate thing from a child care facility. And it's so critical to understand what the community wants, but I don't know how to interpret. I know how to interpret that document less today than I did the first time I saw it, whenever, a year and change ago. So can somebody on staff explain that, please?
Who is
Sure, thank you. Good evening. Sorry, can you hear me, Chair Riggs?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, great question. So let's see, let me start from the beginning. So the list that you're referencing, there's actually 2 pages to
And
that.
Excuse me, this is Principal Planner Kyle Parada speaking.
Yes, I should have introduced myself. Thank you. So there's 2 pages. So the list with A, B, C, D, and E, I think that is the page that would have been used in a workshop. If you look at the page before that in the list, it actually kind of does give you the number of respondents at the top. So let me look it up here with you. So it does give you the number of responses that we did receive in each column. And so, it's not every item, but it does give you an idea of how many we got from the workshop and how they were ranked. That does give you the order that they were ranked in: online responses versus registered and unregistered respondents. So I won't go into all the details for that, but essentially there are the number of responses there. So you can kind of start to see the number that we did receive. And I think to then kind of further clarify, the list, it's a project by project basis in terms of what amenity might make the most sense at that location. And so I don't think that the ranking necessarily affects the Planning Commission's review of the appropriateness of a certain amenity at a certain location. And then I think the last question I heard there was which items are still on the list. And at this point, no projects have been approved. using community amenities in the Bayfront area. And so all the amenities are available still. You have seen a number of them, but they are, since none are approved at this point, they're all still on that list. Does that help clarify?
So thank you. So what we have on that first list is by the category of respondents, then the final ranking in the subcategories of what their interests were, but not necessarily across those categories. Do I have that right? So if I'm looking at the online unregistered respondents of 26 responses, I know what they said within transit and transportation and within community serving retail, but I don't know whether they preferenced sidewalks over a pharmacy. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think you got to take it topic area by topic area. That's a good clarification.
Okay. And then I appreciate that they're all still available, but adding a restroom at the Onata Harris Community Center probably isn't available at this point, right? I mean, or can't somebody at least, I mean, I appreciate that on one level that they haven't been funded, but are we just supposed to independently just be kind of tracking this and spitballing this ourselves? I guess that's fine, but this isn't, that's my question. I mean, that's one example, but there are a couple of others that are in here along those same lines.
Sure. So with regard to the actual amenities and tracking them, that is something that staff, we are doing. You know, we do have a kind of a list of ongoing amenities are being contemplated by each project, but until an action is taken on a project, we're not going to remove them from the list, if that makes sense. And I hear what you're saying about like the restroom at Onata Harris, given the MPCC project. So yes, certain items may just naturally not be available at this point.
I guess I appreciate that, but I mean, wouldn't it be helpful to like give us some sense of that ongoing list, just to be able to track or keep track of these things in different ways? You know, that we've, you know, as you recall, in this one you were talking about a grocery store, over here you were talking about this. This is generally where they're going. Or it's on me that I have not been keeping track of these from conversation to conversation.
No, that's a really good point. And I think that's something that we can into future staff reports, is kind of the currently proposed amenities by project. I think that's something that we can summarize more clearly going forward. I think it is based on projects that we have, you know, proposed community amenities for. We are also processing projects that haven't proposed amenities yet too. So not all projects have a currently proposed community amenity. So just that's something to consider. But we can certainly summarize that by project. I appreciate what you're saying. That is a key point of information that would be helpful. So we'll make a note of that going forward with staff reports. So yeah, I understand.
I appreciate it. I may be sounding like I'm being unnecessarily pointed in this, but I think there's a way with these 2 pages that they could be presented to us to a way that would be slightly more helpful in understanding the current context of the community when we're having these discussions. And I think for an instance like tonight, where you're asking for our feedback, that having that from you all would be a helpful addition in this mix, if we could do something like that in the future. So thank you.
Sure, yeah, we can definitely look into that. I would want to preface it with that until an amenity is approved as part of a project, it is certainly, you know, tentative. And, you know, if you're looking at, let's say, a list or a map even showing where an amenity is currently proposed, we'd have to caveat it with that may not be the final amenity that's ultimately acted upon if the project is approved. But I hear what you're saying. I think there's some good takeaways here, so I appreciate it.
Terrific. Thank you for answering that. I appreciate it. Thank you, Chair Riggs, for letting me ask those questions.
Absolutely, because that's crucial, I think. Anyone else with questions at this moment or comments? We have had our public comment period, so it's open season on anything you'd like to volunteer or query on the project. For example, there's considerably less bike storage than there is parking. Mr. Ducardi.
I was going to defer to Chair Barnes because he had started the questioning on the on the amenity, but I'm happy to ask questions and go from there. I'm just conscious that I've jumped in first twice this evening. So Commissioner Barnes, if you had a thread that you wanted to continue, I wanted to defer to that. Otherwise, I'll ask some more in that.
Thank you. By all means, I do have a robust set of questions, and why don't you take it away, because you're on the floor. Go for it. I'll listen.
That was clarifying. That was clarifying question. I'll by all means.
I'll listen and learn. No. You go first, please.
All right, I'm fine then. So on the community amenity, and for the proposal for a child care facility, which is, I suppose, and having worked in early child care for my professional career a little bit, I do think you can certainly see it as an educational opportunity, which fits into the feedback from the community about a priority for educational opportunities. But I guess my question is, does such a facility need to be located in this building? And if we're looking at this amount of resource to go toward a childcare facility, especially, I guess, because if we're interpreting the feedback from the residents of the Belhaven community that we got 5 years ago, that this really is for the current residents of the Belhaven community that we're paying attention to here, because this is the project that's going in their community. I guess, Mr. Morkos, did you investigate, or could you investigate, or what would it look like to actually have a child care facility that would purchase property, perhaps better or more conveniently located, use the resource then for the purchase or to cover the mortgage, and then endow it? You got an $8 million endowment, that's $400,000 a year it throws off. That could do a lot. So how do we think about this as a community amenity for childcare delivered in this building as opposed to somewhere else in the community?
Yeah, I think it's a fair question, and we did look into different options related to expanding childcare in combination with in a location that was, immediately within Belhaven, and the options are very limited. And so you're basically having to build something from scratch in order to have the required outdoor space to the indoor space. And we just didn't find anything that fit that description immediately within the Belhaven area. And we're able to incorporate it into our project. We've allocated this space for years, and have through the years kind of understood that early education and childcare was very important to the community, and I think we were able to make it work. So it's a combination of, there just aren't really good options immediately within Belhaven, and this is a really good option. It may not be immediately adjacent to Belhaven, but it is fairly close.
Yeah, I suppose just in offering input, I might push back on that a little bit. I mean, there are any number of childcare facilities that I can think of off the top of my head that are in essentially residential community in a house that has made that work. So I guess I'm a little surprised by the lack of being able to find an alternative, or to create an alternative with the space, or with, two properties or something along those lines. But I would just push back on it a little bit, because the cost per square foot of what you are building to go to that amenity is a lot more than what the cost per square foot would be in other places in the community to be able to provide the infrastructure, is it not?
That's not what we found. To have the outdoor space and indoor space, and the permits and the zoning that's required, that's not what we found.
Okay. So on the amenity then, can you explain a little bit more? I appreciate the cost structure for all 5 and the 25% at market rate. I think in your presentation you said it was so that it would assure that the delivery of services was at a standard that was like other childcare delivery. I guess, could you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, of course. So by offering 25% of these spaces at a full price based on what the market can stand, it attracts people who have other options, who could go to a childcare facility that does not subsidize 75% of their enrollment. And what that means is that it forces the childcare in this situation that has a wide range of socioeconomic enrollment to maintain a level of service that is commensurate with other childcare facilities that don't subsidize for their students. So the concern would be that if it were 100% subsidized, the concern is that, you know, potentially the level of service isn't as high as where individuals are paying market rate for that childcare. The other thing that, as I've learned more about this space, is really important about that 25% and just a range of socioeconomic backgrounds is that it's really important for kids at that age to have interactions with a variety of backgrounds, with a diversity of backgrounds, socioeconomic and otherwise. And so this facilitates that type of diversity.
Yeah, your second point, that second point makes sense. The first one, not as much. I'm conscious I don't want to speak for the other commissioners, and I appreciate that this is something that you've looked into and explored. It would sure be helpful to have somebody that was an expert either from the city or from somebody else to be able to, if this is in fact community amenity, to be able to answer these kinds of questions about what's the best structure, to be able to provide the best opportunity for people who need the support versus the best opportunity for an exceptional childcare experience for the families and the children that are there, and how to make that happen optimally. So, and I appreciate your comments. I just think it would be great if this in fact is the direction it goes, to get that really spelled out clearly in all of this. And then on the last thing I had on the amenity question is the outdoor space, and this is on the interaction with the public space. So I believe you said there's going to be an opaque fence that is going to separate off, and that's so this is, I can guess, but tell me why. Why is there an opaque fence in this activated public space, which will now have essentially 2 different spaces, a public space for the child care facility and then a public space for everybody else to be able to activate and walk through?
Yeah.
Why an opaque fence?
So this is driven by regulations for child care facilities. And my understanding is it's for the safety of the kids to have protection from both being able to look in and being able to access it from the exterior.
Okay, again, I mean, I could just, when we have these meetings in person and we go over to the City Hall and we sit there, right across the walkway is a childcare facility that has a chain link fence is the only separation. So again, this is not my area of expertise, but I can think of any number of childcare facilities that are near public spaces, and Willows Park is another one where they're not opaque.
Okay.
But I understand if that's I mean, certainly the safety of the children would be the most important thing. I just think it's unfortunate then, because what could be a benefit of having this sort of multi-generational interactive space that is more visually open actually now feels like you've got a Berlin Wall that's cut down the middle of it. To me, it detracts from both. It detracts from the experience of the children who now are in this kind of sort of cloistered outdoor space where, you know, they kind of have to look up to see stuff. And then the rest of the community that doesn't get the full breadth how that's designed, if I'm looking at that design the right way. That seems really unfortunate in all of this.
I think that's a good point. So we will look into that. Thank you for that.
So I don't, you know, as long as I'm talking here on the community amenity piece on this, and to the staff questions on the community amenity, relative to the other community amenities, relative to the feedback, relative to what we've heard about need, relative that I think childcare is educational. I think education begins as soon as you are born. That's been proven. And exceptional early childhood experiences are what set children up to succeed when they enter kindergarten and grade school. So I think this is perfectly acceptable within the list of community amenities based on everything that I know right now. I think the questions I have are the three that I asked. The first one is, does it have to be at this site? Or in fact, for the city, could these resources, the money, be better used somewhere else in the community that might actually be more accessible? Number two, is this the right mix of fee structure, especially given that there's some discrepancy about the total amount of money that's going to the amenity in this mix? Because it should be as affordable as possible to as many folks as possible. That would be the benefit to the community. And then the third one is this activation. If it's staying on site, just some concern about the activation of the outdoor space. Seems like a shame. So those would be my comments on the community amenity portion of this. And I have comments on other areas, but I will stop so other folks can lead on this for now.
All right, does anyone else like to speak? And I'm sorry, Mr. Barnes.
So speak being, we're having comment period from the planning commissioners relative to the second half of tonight's meeting, which is the study session for this project. Is that correct?
Right, but I don't think that should limit you to asking something that's been discussed in the earlier section. This is sort of the overall. Does that help?
Yes, it does. So I will jump in and just talk to the questions we have in front of us and some overall comments as well. Let me start with the project itself. I think the project is well designed I'm going to go back to my 90-10 discussion. This is a 90-10 from a square footage standpoint, 90% commercial, 90% residential, 10% commercial if you do the math. That's what this district is. This district is a live, work, play district on this particular site. I think it's a well-designed site, and it incorporates the both of them at the proportions, I think, which are intended in the Connect Menlo process. This is RMUB, multi-use with a bonus. So it perfectly fills and checks the box for what the intended land use is for this parcel with this land use designation, zoning, and the development standards associated with this particular area in this particular parcel. So I think it does. I am pleased with what they've brought forward in terms of what they're going to do on this site. If I walk into the site layout, I think they have done a nice job on this. I have nothing more to add on that. This is our third study session. I think we've been to that movie, and I don't think there is really largely material items relative to that changed in this proposal, which caused me to have comment. Getting to the overall architectural design, I like it. I think it works for both the office being a much smaller component, but I think on the residential side, I think the use of materials, I think the articulation, I think the fenestration across the sides are well incorporated. You know, I see a lot of projects in my work, and this is a well done project in terms of finish and design. So I have no problems with that. The community amenity proposal. So let me work on that a little bit. And just to give a little bit of background, for years I was on the board of GeoKids Child Care Center, and that's in the Geological Survey campus. It's the largest child care center in Menlo Park, and it's an NAEYC accredited, which there's probably only 2 in Menlo Park. So for years, having my fingers into how these facilities are run, what the economics of the facilities are, and how difficult it is to get a facility sited. Really, you know, a lot of work in that area. So I'll work backwards from The difficulty of getting childcare sited is tremendous. Finding the right physical characteristics for a site, finding the right zoning which allows for it. And this is at an institutional scale. There's a big, big difference between home-based childcare and non-home-based, more institutionalized. And you get benefits that are associated with accreditation and the programs that go with it and the staffing associated with it. So there's a great, it's hard, you will see very few childcares formed in Menlo Park that aren't formed some way related to a faith-based entity, because they're the only ones with space and they're the only ones with parking. So when you have an opportunity to do it, it's a good opportunity, you got to run with it. Now that said, this is a small allocation of space, like 1,600 square feet of space is limited, and the open area as well. I think there are best practices, and I think before we as planning commissioners jump in and say, should there be an appetite for childcare, right? So I, for one, vote for childcare. But to that question, is this the right space? Is this enough space? And would that X amount of dollars be better spent elsewhere? I think that's a really valid question at $8.44 million. I think the bulk of it goes to the operating cost. It is very expensive to run these facilities. You have to retain staff. There's a lot of turnover. You need professional organization. So it's not a cheap endeavor. So I think a lot of the money in the end will get eaten up on the operational side of it, as opposed to the, we'll see how the rent, the abated rent looks and what, how much that was for. But I would say we should have another set of eyes on this space size-wise, and if it's found to be 1,600 square feet can get the job done, I fully support it, because it's not easy to get elsewhere. But if it's not, if there are concerns about the size of it, let's keep this pot of money for this community amenity. I would support taking this and reallocating it toward early childhood site somewhere else. So that's my piece on, and I'm thankful. I'm thankful for the developer for going ahead and contemplating doing this amendment, because it's helpful. And the mixing of socioeconomic is an uncomfortable discussion, but I know we saw it at GeoKids. It was $2,000 a month, and people would come in and they would ask, they would have a tour, and at the end of the tour, they would. The ED would tell them it was, $2,100 a month, and people's face would just sink, right? So getting market rate and getting subsidized demographics into the same child care center is hard, and it takes subsidies, and it's best when you have that mixed across your student population. It works. Talking about the vehicle and bicycle parking waiver, I don't particularly have an appetite for being under the required amount. In reading the staff report, there's a comment that the staff is working with the applicant about how to figure out how to find these bicycle parking spaces in light of VMT, which is the right way to go on this project. If you're doing VMT, it means you're not paving roads and you're not increasing capacity for more people to come, from Union City through to Mountain View, right? You're doing VMT because you're assuming that a proportion of it is going to be closer to home, and particularly in this area. So I think reducing bicycle parking is the wrong way to go. Now, finding the space for it on the site, that's a different discussion, but I think that discussion is important, and I think that space should be found to make sure that this conforms to the bicycle parking requirements. The BMR proposal, I don't know if any additional comments are on, and then the overall development proposal, is this the refined design of is it appropriate for the area in transition from office to industrial to residential? And I think it is. The last question on here is the roadway congestion, level of service, intersection improvements. And I just want to understand this a little bit more. I think we touched on it either on this project or a previous project. I am never in favor of of making it easier for this project to be a waypoint along someone else's way to get through the area. I am, however, obviously sympathetic to any infrastructure improvements which help the area. So what I'm trying to do is kind of parse them out so that this level of service related improvement isn't going to induce demand at this area, which is the wrong direction to go in, or is it an infrastructure improvement that doesn't necessarily induce demand, but is a net benefit to this particular area? So if someone from staff could just give a little bit more color on the bullet point about roadway congestion, intersection improvements, and what are we talking about? What's the scope? How much money? Help me on that if you would. And
Yeah, this is
hi, Renee.
Thank you. Through the chair. Yes, this is Renee Bale, again from Associate Transportation Engineer. So this, like the project that you had before, which is 111 Independence, which is about the same location, the same intersections, number of intersections, 3 that are impacted for the near term plus project condition, and similar number of intersection and same intersections affected for the cumulative plus project condition. The proposed improvements most of them are included in our transportation demand transportation master plan, and I believe though these improvements won't worsen VMT yeah, so it's more like to address the traffic congestion brought about by additional trips by the project. So I mean, these improvements are overlapping with the other projects that are going to be approved by the commission and subsequently by the city council. So this is something that I don't foresee that's going to make traffic or that's just going to address traffic congestion, but will not induce make the VMT worse or induce or produce induced demand in this area.
So through the chair, is the salient question, is it A, should we be doing it or not? And B, who writes the check for it? Is this really a 2-part question that we're talking about here?
Are you asking Renee?
Yes.
You mean whether this project is going to pay for the improvements or they're going to be sharing with the other developers whose project has similar impacts on transportation, on reducing congestion? Is that your question, Commissioner Barnes?
Yeah, well, yes, and to read this, are there any specific improvements the Planning Commission does or does not want included in conditions of approval? So there's probably 1,000 things I can come up with, but I don't know. I mean, there's no context around the question. Is it an open checkbook and we can hoist onto the developer a complete redo of our transportation grid, or is it? I mean, what are we talking about here in terms of who writes the check for it? Who's paying for it? Is the question I think we're being asked, but it doesn't really say that.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's something that when we were doing the conditions of approval for 111 Independence and Menlo Uptown, they're also overlapping with respect to the improvements that need to be that are proposed for those 2 projects. I think there's something that we need to talk to our city attorney and figure out how we would like the cost of these improvements to be shared among the different developments in the area.
My fundamental belief is that transportation, the TIF, the fee, the impact fee, is designed for this purpose. I think we have a process for allocating out these costs. We have a process for recouping them, and we have a process for identifying where they should go. So my first inclination is to say that if these are improvements that need to be done, that's what the impact fee is for, unless there's something extenuating, which is super specific to here. And I don't really know how to look at it other than to say that's what we have impact fees for. And and if this is considered to be outside of that, then the question is, can the project reasonably be asked to bear this cost, and how much is it? And without those two questions, I can't. Without contextualization of what we're talking about, I have a tough time answering that.
Mr. Barnes, could I prompt that Mr. Parada weigh in on this from a
Sure.
slightly higher elevation?
Thank you, Chair Riggs, and thank you, Renee, for your responses as well. So let's see if I could maybe back up a little bit. So Chair Riggs, do you have a specific question, or are you with me just to respond to Commissioner Barnes?
Well, yeah, my question is to enable Mr. Barnes to get an answer here. I mean, I think I have a sense of what the answer is, but the question would be, under the context of this review and this study session, are we looking at whether or not it's appropriate for the applicant to contribute to intersection approval above and beyond his TIF contribution? And then what would the logic be of making that request? Would that be a community amenity, for example, under traffic relief?
Sure. So, okay, let's see. So in terms of the intersection improvements that are identified, so there are transportation impact analysis guidelines. We moved to VMT under CEQA, right? So from a from a CEQA threshold significance, it's vehicle miles traveled now. Our TIA guidelines, though, do include a requirement to do level of service analysis, and as part of that, it identifies if there is any impact from a project on an intersection. And so what you're seeing in the staff report, and you see in the non-CEQA level of service discussion in the draft EIR, is a identification of where there is a increased delay at an intersection due to this project. And so in that sense, what we've identified is that there are a number of intersections that have that potential delay. And so what we're asking for input from the commission is, should the staff engage our transportation consultant to further identify what those improvements would be, what are needed, and what the schematics are there. And so if the commission was interested, as a condition of approval, we could require the project to mitigate is not the right word because it's not a CEQA impact, but improve an intersection back to existing conditions. So those are the things that we've talked about in other study sessions for like 111 Independence, as well as Menlo Uptown most recently. And so for those, I believe the commission did identify that staff should continue to evaluate those potential intersection improvements and whether or not those would be conditions of approval, and bring those back to the commission as part of the project entitlements.
Does staff feel that this is consistent with a history of improvements requests outside of the TIF, above and beyond the TIF payment?
Okay, so it's a good question. Let me try to answer that. There's a few other things I think I need to answer first before we get to that component. Okay, so let me provide a little more context. So what we're looking at here, these improvements would be what you might have traditionally seen in an EIR as a mitigation measure for level of service, right? But now they're shifted to potential conditions of approval. I do want to identify, though, that these are project specific to improve back to pre-existing or existing conditions. And when they are in the TIF, if an applicant did construct the improvements as part of conditional approval, they would get credit for that that cost that they bared for those improvements towards their TIF payment. So it's not above and beyond. So I want to make sure we're clear. I think I heard a couple times that was mentioned. I want to make sure that that's provided to the commission here, is that if it is identifying the TIF and an applicant constructs it, the amount that they paid to construct it would be credited towards their TIF payment. But I do want to make sure that's not, if it's in the TIF, it's not just covered by payment of TIF fees, but, and that's a little like saying ATM machine, but you know what I mean, a TIF payment. And essentially what they would do is get credit for that fee instead.
That answers it for me, Mr. Barnes. That pretty much bring it home.
It gets me 90% there. And Mr. Parada, like, why would, what's the sense of, it's a two-part question. Why wouldn't we ask someone to bring it back to pre-development conditions? Because that seems like a logical ask. And it's a subjective question, obviously. And second of all, at what point is there a scoping of what this costs? And if we make a blank, so who makes the judgment call that bringing it back would cost this amount of money, but yet the aggregate benefit is this much, which is disproportionate to the cost of it? Because everything's cost, you know, there's cost benefit analysis to it. And I guess my reticence to say, yes, go after it, is there a break in there, or is there a review in there where someone does a cost benefit which says, yeah, this is a good idea to do, bring it back, and it, you know, it was a reasonable amount of money for the benefit that we got for bringing it back? Or are we setting a train down the track and then, well, this is a bad idea, but look, you said go do it, so we're going to do it? How does that work?
It's a good question. It's definitely difficult to answer. But I think the first step for us is to, as staff, to identify what is feasible. So we have the improvements identified in the draft DIR, but what we don't know is the schematics, and we need to kind of get further designs to see what is feasible. In terms of the cost, I think staff can probably provide some general estimates for what certain projects might take. I mean, in terms of like restriping, I think we can probably provide some estimates, some pavement, some roadway widening. I think there are some kind of estimates out there, but ultimately they would be estimates that may change, and construction costs are changing all the time. And so, you know, what we estimate today may not be what it costs a year from now when it's constructed. So that's a little difficult to also predict in that sense, but I think we can look at an improvement and understand generally a ballpark, I believe. I would defer to transportation for more details on that specifically, but there are certainly some things we can look at to see if it is feasible. And I'd say that on that note, we have identified kind of which improvements wouldn't be feasible, where there really are things like roadway, right-of-way acquisition, to widen the roadways is not really feasible for an applicant to take on, especially when it's off-site. So those are things where the cost just doesn't kind of equate to the improvement.
Got it. So, and what I'm trying to do is just have kind of a sprinkle of good government, which is, you know, careful what you ask for. So everything has to be reasonable, and it sounds like there's a reasonableness test. You know, I'm making those words up and saying those, but if you could tell me there's a reasonableness test, then yes, having a developer do a putback to pre-development conditions in a way that is beneficial and has a good cost benefit, yes. So there's like 4 caveats in there, but with those caveats, now that I understand what's being asked, I will say that. Okay, so I think, so is that, I'm sorry, Kyle, is that, you're nodding. So I guess the following question I should ask is that an okay thing is that an okay expectation to have? Let me sort of put it that way.
It certainly is reasonable, and I agree. I think I hear you loud and clear, and I think that's something we can take away and incorporate into these kind of schematics and feasibility that we bring back. For all these projects, I think that's a fair thing to assess. Completely understand where you're coming from.
Okay, so thank you for that, Kyle. And that wraps up my portion of this. So with those things that I said, and I would love to dig a little bit further in the childcare to wrap that up, and I think we need a third party. And I will say, after we had the childcare discussion about going in across from MA, a consultant called me, who's local to Menlo Park, and says, hey, look, we do siting we're consultants, we do pro bono siting for childcare to advise people on what will work in a specific facility. So there is a consultancy group out there. There's people who really can opine on whether this is an appropriate site or not. So with that extra layer of review for the community amenity, all my other comments stand, and I am in support of this project, the things that I said as well. So that's my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Doran.
Yeah, I just wanted to run through the questions that the planning department had asked, given the feedback they asked for. So, you know, I think it's mostly been said already, and we've certainly looked at this project before, but just to run through the list, the site layout, including the proposed open space, I like it. I think the layout works. I like the open space. I particularly like the contrast in the architectural style between the office space and the residential space. This area is supposed to be, this district is supposed to be a mixed use district. I think they've done a good job of integrating the different uses, and they've varied the architecture in a way that I think works for this project individually and works for the area as a whole. So I'm very positive on the first question. Overall architectural design, the changes since last time, I think it's attractive, the architecture. I don't have any criticisms on that. The much discussed community amenity, I think we asked for a child care facility, and they're giving us one. And I think they should be commended for that. It's not easy, as Commissioner Barnes has alluded. And I think the siting question, you know, I have some sympathy with the applicant about the difficulties of that. I think it is difficult, and it's not obvious to me that there would be a easy solution closer to the residential parts of Belhaven. I don't think buying one or two houses really gets you a comparable facility. And houses in Belhaven are about $1 million a piece now. So it's not obvious that that would be cost effective either when they have this site and they have the contractors on site to build it out to spec. And as I understand, the specs on child care facilities are pretty exacting. So I think that we shouldn't underestimate the difficulty of building this out. So I think it's a very appropriate use. I like what they're proposing to do with it. As far as the 25% paying customers, I understand this from a diversity point of view, but also I think I have more faith in the market to achieve the result that the applicant postulated for that. I think that having a market component to the facility will help ensure that the facility and the services are up to the standards of paying facilities in the area. I think it's a great thing. So I like that concept. We haven't talked a lot about the BMR proposal, but I think the applicant should be commended for responding to our desire to have a mix of income levels in the BMR units, not have them all be the same. So I do want to note that for the record. I don't have anything to add to the roadway congestion and level of service conversation. I think that given that the applicant will be contributing to the Transportation Impact Fund or Transportation Impact Fee, I trust the city to come up with the best use of those funds. And then the overall development proposal, again, I think that it's very much in keeping with what was envisioned for this neighborhood. and it is the correct use of space for this parcel of land. So I too would just like to express support for the application as currently proposed.
All right, thank you. Mr. DeGardi.
Yeah, I can do the same thing. Site layout, including proposed open space. Yes, I think you've responded to our input from previous discussions and all this. I do think it would be helpful in the last question to get plans that show the proposed transition between the project and the adjacent project. It's something that we've asked about before and it's still not entirely clear. I think actually just seeing that put together would be nice to have. Overall architectural design of the proposed building, I agree with the comments from the other commissioners so far. I think it looks really nice. I think it does a nice job with sort of different massing so that you get a feel that from the street doesn't sort of make it imposing, but gets an awful lot of people in there. I think it's well done. The one thing for me as this has progressed is that the boutique office building really does look like this sort of separate floating above the community, glassed in kind of really special place. For me, that seems like a bit of a shame. I wish that it would feel more connected to the ground, more connected to the community in this mix. But I can understand it. But for me, that's the one way this has progressed that doesn't feel quite as great. On the community amenity, we've talked about this all over the place. I do think it's worth exploring in exactly the ways we've talked about. In terms of letting the market decide, you could put an $8 million endowment that would throw off $400,000 in vouchers, which I think covers 17 slots of GeoKids in perpetuity. I just think there are all sorts of ways that you could look at this, and somebody should just look at it really carefully. But I do commend Mr. Morkos and the team for the creative solution to this, and as Commissioner Doran said, responding to the interest about childcare. On the vehicle and bicycle parking waiver, I'm fine under parking. I don't like parking spaces. I do think finding places to get bikes. Appreciate the e-bike plug-in, but would agree with Commissioner Barnes's comments. Completely agree with Commissioner Doran on the BMR proposal, and like that pursuing the spread across income levels. On the roadway congestion LOS piece, I like the Barnes principle that was articulated, which is I don't want to see anything that essentially makes it a wider stovepipe that simply shoves more traffic through, especially cut-through traffic. So however we're working out that solution so that it doesn't make that happen can work. I think the overall, and on that one, for me, comes back to what I said in the IR, which is a TDM plan that is robust, a TDM plan that's enforceable, and I think there's a TDM plan that should be able to go well below the 15% reduction. I would love it if you all, as building these projects in our community, could be a leader in showing how this is done, just like Facebook a decade ago was a leader in showing how they reduced single occupancy vehicles coming to that campus there. They were commended for that then. You all could be in a similar position for these mixed use developments going forward. I think that would be splendid. So overall development proposal, I think this does work. I think it's gonna be a nice addition to the community. And my last comment is simply to say, you know how I feel about diesel generators. I will not say it again in this mix, but it's a crying shame that we're gonna stick a diesel emergency generator into a building that's gonna be otherwise splendid in its energy use in this mix. And thanks again for all the time and the effort and the time this evening.
Thank you, Mr. DeCardi. You are the most concise speaker we have, and my personal goal that I will never reach. And I do want to assure you that PG&E have promised there will never be another electrical outage in our lifetime. Oh, I might have made that up. All right, I'll throw some comments out, and we'll try to sort of bounce around so I don't have to be too redundant. I agree with the other three commissioners almost entirely. And with the highlights being, I think that the overall design is well done, particularly the residential building. I think the open space is just fine, and that's been worked on so thoroughly with staff, I would hesitate to make any second or late comment. I think the community amenity, given that it was what we asked for, is hard to criticize. Certainly in concept, although I concur with Mr. DeCarty, I happen to do, my practice happens to do childcare facilities. We've done 4 commercial conversions in the last 4 years, converting an office building, a church Sunday school space, private residence, maybe twice. So a lot is very doable, and I can even help a little bit with the budget. Converting, just last year, converting the former Sunday school space to an entirely conforming to the letter childcare space for 26 to 40 kids was done on a budget of $450,000, inclusive of design and administrative fees. The square footage was all told in the 1,800 square foot range. So it makes it very viable to make what I call the larger, mid-large facility of 40 kids in the $500,000 range, not by any means in the multi-million-dollar range to convert existing space. Now, this does not include leasing or buying property. And then I can't help but observe that by encouraging you to include childcare, we have not entirely followed the community amenities intention, which I mean, it was developed very largely with the Belhaven community. And yet you happen to be, your project is rather remote from the Belhaven community. There are 3 communities that you are closer to than the Belhaven community. You would be serving North Fair Oaks. You would be serving Haven Avenue. You would even be serving Lorelei Manor. I would say you'd be about equidistant Suburban Park to your location as Belhaven is. So, and that's fine because this town, this region can use a childcare facility in almost any location. I would say a childcare facility would be welcome next door to 2 other childcare facilities if we could just get it built. So I'm inclined to be very supportive. I do think a review of the budget is appropriate. And there was one other childcare comment, I think. Yes, and obviously, well, to me, it's fairly obvious it doesn't serve the building. A single parent, I don't know how likely they are to try to squeeze into a studio or junior 1-bedroom. So I think the population under 6-year-old child population of your building is going to be rather small. Oh yes, the other comment, which I appreciated Mr. DeCarty making almost verbatim to my notes, that I'm not sure any of the 4 projects that I've been involved in, and not Willow Oaks Park and not Menlo's Child Care Center, any of those have an opaque enclosure. And I particularly agree that the very presence would activate that almost alley between the 2 buildings. So that one item, I think, should be revisited. Simple item, I think. And then someone made I guess it was you, Mr. Marcos, made a comment about regulations. Potentially about that divisor. I've never seen that regulation. I think that was the comment that you made. The Pocket Park as you walk through on the left, if you look to the left, you see the parking structure or the parking level for the residential. And you have perforated metal screen. I'm not sure how that's treated either with planting, which is not indicated on the site plan as such, or with lighting. Typically, if you can see through to a parking level, it's an especially cold and dark environment. Not a plus, but it doesn't take a lot to screen from that. If your mechanical engineer intends that to be a naturally ventilated parking space, you need a certain percentage of the exterior walls to be a minimum of 50% open, and I'm not sure whether that affects your screening there, since you do surround the structure with residential units. And then agreement with a couple of other speakers regarding bike storage. It really stood out for me that with this particular effort to try to reduce additional traffic, and it's notable. I mean, as we were considering earlier, the vehicle trips on a per square foot basis seem to be almost the same as for office when you build compact residential, and an additional almost 2,000 spaces, I'm sorry, daily trips is notable, and that's for residential, and it's 2,300 for the total of the proposed uses. So TDM is very important. I don't know personally if you provide bicycle storage space equivalent to, say, 60% of the unit count, whether you can potentially get 60% of people using bicycles, but that would be fantastic, especially in this jobs-rich neighborhood that we are creating. So I would suggest re-examining that. I certainly don't want to prescribe a number of biking spaces, but I do think that would benefit from a second look.
Chair Riggs,
Yes.
may I just respond to that point, because I think it's an important one. So as far as bike parking, we have for the residential 480 long-term parking spots and 48 short-term. So,
oh, is that bike 482?
480 plus 48. So
then I misread. That's my error.
Oh, no problem at all. And as far as multifamily garage parking, we are at the bare minimum, one per unit for our zoning. And the request in the staff report that I think it's important to delineate is, the question is, we have 15 BMR bonus units that gets us from 320 units to 335. The question in the staff report pertains to those additional 15 units for which we aren't providing garage parking, and also we aren't providing the 1.5 bike parking required. But we have ample bike parking in the multifamily building.
Right, and the 480 spaces, some of them would be available to the BMRs.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for that correction, because I obviously read that much too quickly. And then just to wrap up the TDM, I have to agree with Mr. DeCarty that a 15% reduction target is awfully mild. I remember being persuaded almost 15 years ago by Bohannon Development that the very best target they could do for TDM was 15%. And a mere 4 years later, I was quite regretful that we hadn't pressed, that we could do better. Facebook, although it's an employment center, which is very different from residential, targeted 40% and I believe achieved something closer to 50%. So I hope we can raise the bar on TDM. And having said that, overall, again, I want to stress that I think this is a very nice project. I think your architect did a marvelous job, particularly on the residential, but also the site planning. I think it will be quite an asset to this new neighborhood. And that would conclude my remarks. If anyone has some follow-up remarks, I don't need to be the last person. Mr. Barnes.
I do, and thank you, Chair Riggs. And as you were talking, I was also multitasking, frankly, listening at the same time, but multitasking. And I see this is addressing my previous concern or questions about the size of the facility. So two things I notice here. One is I do see that this operator is NAUIC accredited, which is a big thing. And that they are gives me a tremendous level of comfort. I just did the math as well with 35 square foot per kid at 22 square feet. It just gets, they have enough allocated space across the board for what they're doing. So my concerns about the space are a little bit less. Would we like to serve more than 22 kids? Yes, but if that's the space, you know, I'm not saying let's try to find out how we can get more space in this building, but let me leave it at this. My need to have my desire for my own noggin to have a consultant look at it is I'll take that off the table. I feel comfortable with this operator and I feel comfortable with the spacing of it. Would we like to have more in this facility? Yes. But what I also wanted to add is the value of having this co-located in an office building, which is really hard to do. Oftentimes legacy owners don't want childcare in their office buildings because they're renting to office tenants, and office tenants generally don't like to have this down below. So to find a situation where we can co-locate it in the same building is really opportunistic, and the drop-off space is there, and the teachers have places to park. So there are a lot of benefits, and certainly we asked for this, and I'm more supportive now with a little bit more diving into the size of it. So I wanted to highlight that, and I wanted to highlight the benefit to all of how important it is to have this co-located in this office building, because you get the ability to drop off and you get the ability to park your tenants, excuse me, your staff there. So those are my points. Thank you.
Thank you for that conclusion. Oh, I neglected to say to staff that I support the staff's effort at intersection improvements based on staff's judgment. So if I think that concludes our comments. I think you can tell they are by far overall supportive. Is your next stop City Council?
Our next stop is going to be Housing Commission for our BMR review, and then we'll be back before you for hopefully approval. And then City Council after that. Okay, and I hope I already said I echo the support for the BMR proposal that you've made. All right, with that, I think we have concluded our study session and overall our reviews of the Menlo Portal project. And thank you very much for bringing it back to us a third time. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your time.
All right. Bye. And with that, I don't know if Ms. Felber is still in attendance. It's after 10 o'clock. I have, both I and staff have emailed our commissioner who thought she would join late and have gotten no response as of this moment. And I'm checking right now. And so with Mr. Ducardi recused, it looks like we would not be able to rejoin the 24 Menlo Avenue review with apologies. Ms. Sandemeyer, you didn't by any chance get through to anyone else like Ms. Tate?
No, but the applicant for the 2040 Minalto did email us to say that she wasn't able to continue listening to the meeting. So
Well,
she did indicate, yeah, she did indicate that she would be available April 12th with, which will be the next meeting. So we'll continue it to that meeting.
oh, and April 12th was already a busy meeting, I think. Well, that may be the ultimate segue to the next part of our agenda, which is future items.
Yes, yes. So the next meeting is April 12th. So we have a number of smaller items on there, and we'll continue the 2040 Minalto project to that meeting. So that is 3 weeks from tonight. So the agenda hasn't been finalized. And then moving forward, the next meeting will be April 26th. And we're looking at a number of projects for that meeting, but that hasn't been finalized either. That concludes my updates, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Do we have any questions of staff tonight? All right, seeing none, I think we can call this meeting adjourned as of 10:17 p.m. Thank you all. Good night until April 12th.
Thank you, Chair Riggs. Thank you, staff. Really appreciate all the time and effort.